Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Ryan Nelson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote western region of the Adirondack Mountains in New York, at a place locals call Whispering Pines Trail. I've always been an avid hiker. The solitude of nature, the physical challenge, the peaceful disconnect from technology, these things kept me sane through my high-pressure job as a financial analyst in Manhattan. Every few months, I'd escape the city for a weekend of hiking and camping. It was my therapy. My therapist had actually recommended these trips after my divorce. Find yourself in solitude, she'd said. What I found instead was something I still can't fully explain. The Whispering Pines Trail wasn't on any official maps. I'd heard about it from a barista at a small coffee shop in Old Forge, a gateway town to the Adirondacks. She'd mentioned it when she saw my hiking gear as I ordered my morning coffee. "You look like someone who enjoys the road less traveled," she said, her eyes lingering on my expensive backpack. "Ever heard of Whispering Pines?" I hadn't. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's beautiful, but most locals won't go near it. Too many stories." She wrote down directions on a napkin. "Just be back before dark. The pines don't just whisper at night." I laughed it off. Every small town has its legends, designed to intrigue tourists. But I was intrigued. After thanking her, I headed out, following her hand-drawn map. The trail was about 15 miles from Old Forge, accessible via a barely visible dirt road that branched off the main highway. The barista, Ellie, according to her name tag, had been right about one thing. It was breathtaking. Massive white pines towered overhead, their needles creating a hushed canopy that muffled all sound. The undergrowth was sparse, allowing easy hiking, and shafts of sunlight pierced through the branches, illuminating patches of forest floor in golden light. It was perfect. I decided to camp for 2 nights, setting up my tent in a small clearing about 2 miles from the trailhead. The first afternoon, I hiked another 3 miles in, noting landmarks for a longer expedition the next day. The solitude was complete. No human sounds penetrated this forest. No distant traffic, no airplanes overhead. Nothing but the occasional rustle of wildlife and the soft sigh of wind through the pines. That first night, exhausted from the drive and the hike, I fell asleep quickly in my tent, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs. I dreamed of walking through the forest, but the trees had faces, their bark forming mouths that moved silently. I woke around 2 a.m. disoriented. The wind had picked up. Through the tent's thin walls, I could hear the pines swaying, their needles brushing against each other with a sound like whispers. Fragments of words, almost intelligible, seemed to float on the breeze. I told myself it was just the wind, just my brain finding patterns in random noise. But then I heard my name, Ryan. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I unzipped the tent and peered out into the darkness. The nearly full moon cast enough light to see the clearing and the first row of trees surrounding it. Nothing moved except the swaying branches. "Hello," I called out softly, feeling ridiculous. Of course, no one was there. "Ryan, come deeper." The voice, if it was a voice, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was in the rustling leaves, in the creaking branches, in the very air itself. I closed the tent quickly, zipping it up as if the thin nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. "Just the wind," I muttered to myself. "Just your imagination." I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispering continued, sometimes seeming to form words, sometimes just a meaningless susurration. Eventually, I put in earbuds and played music until I fell into a fitful sleep. Morning brought clarity and skepticism. In daylight, the forest was just a forest again. I laughed at my midnight fears as I boiled water for coffee on my small camp stove. The coffee tasted bitter, but it cleared the last cobwebs of sleep and unease. My plan for the day was to hike deeper into the forest, perhaps as far as 6 or 7 miles in. The area was reportedly home to a small, unnamed lake that few people visited, perfect for some peaceful reflection and maybe a swim if the day got warm enough. I packed a day bag with essentials: water, trail mix, a sandwich, first aid kit, and a map. My phone, which predictably had no service, I left in the tent. What was the point of carrying it? I did take my camera, though. The day was perfect for hiking, cool but not cold, with a light breeze that kept insects at bay. The forest grew denser as I moved farther from the main trail, the trees older and more massive. Their trunks were gnarled with age, bark twisted into patterns that occasionally resembled faces if you looked too long. About 4 miles in, I found a small stream and decided to follow it, guessing it might lead to the lake. The sound of running water was a pleasant change from the silence of the forest. As I walked alongside it, I noticed something odd. The water was running crystal clear, but the rocks beneath it were stained a rusty red color. Iron deposits, probably. After another mile, the stream widened, and I caught my first glimpse of the lake through the trees. It was smaller than I'd expected, maybe half a mile across, nestled in a natural bowl surrounded by pine-covered hills. The surface was perfectly still, mirroring the sky and trees, but something wasn't right. As I approached the shore, I realized what was bothering me. There were no birds, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering, no fish jumping in the lake. The normal sounds of a forest ecosystem were absent, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. At the water's edge, I crouched down and dipped my hand in. The water was cold, but not frigid. I cupped some in my palm and raised it to my face, intending to splash it on my skin to cool off. But as the water neared my face, I caught a faint, unpleasant odor, metallic and organic, like old blood. I let the water fall back into the lake and wiped my hand on my pants. Standing up, I surveyed the shoreline. About 50 yards to my right, something pale caught my eye. I walked toward it, my boots crunching on the pebbled shore. It was a deer carcass, half submerged in the lake. The body was bloated, and the water around it was tinged with that same rusty color I'd noticed in the stream. Natural, I told myself. Animals die in nature all the time, but the deer's condition bothered me. Its belly was distended not just with gases from decomposition, but split open, the organs removed. The cut was too clean, too straight. This wasn't the work of scavengers. I took a step back, suddenly uneasy. That's when I noticed the footprints in the mud nearby. Human footprints, but strangely shaped. Too long, the toes more separated than normal. They led from the carcass into the forest. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to return to my campsite and leave this place. But curiosity pushed me forward. I found myself following the strange footprints into the trees, away from the lake. The trail of footprints led to a small clearing where the trees had been bent and broken to form a rough circle, the ground at the center bare of vegetation. In the middle of this circle stood a crude structure made of branches and animal bones, tied together with what looked like sinew. It resembled a miniature version of a human figure, about 3 feet tall. My mouth went dry. This was no natural formation. Someone, or something, had created this. Recently, too, as there was no weathering on the bones or branches. I reached out to touch the structure, then thought better of it. As I withdrew my hand, a whisper of wind moved through the clearing, causing the branches of the surrounding trees to sway. That same whispering sound from the night before rose up, but louder now, more distinct. "Ryan, you've come deeper." I spun around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the heavy silence that followed. Nothing answered except the continuing whispers from the trees. I took out my camera and quickly snapped photos of the strange structure, then turned to leave. The sooner I got back to my tent, packed up, and left this place, the better. But as I turned to retrace my steps, I realized I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from. The footprints I'd followed seemed to have vanished from the soft earth. Panic fluttered in my chest. I took a deep breath and checked my compass. The needle was spinning wildly, unable to find north. I shook it, tapped it, but the needle continued its frantic rotation. A cold sweat broke out across my skin despite the mild temperature. "Okay," I said aloud, trying to calm myself. "The lake is downhill. Follow the slope." I picked a direction that seemed to lead downhill and started walking. The trees seemed to close in around me, their trunks somehow narrower and closer together than I remembered. The light dimmed, though I could still see patches of blue sky overhead. It was as if the forest itself had changed while I was in that clearing. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I emerged not at the lake, but at another clearing. This one was larger, with a single massive pine at its center, taller and older than any I'd seen before. Its trunk was at least 6 feet in diameter, the bark deeply furrowed with age, and carved into that bark was a crude face, 2 slanted gouges for eyes, a larger one for a mouth. I approached slowly, thinking it must be the work of some previous hiker. The carving looked old, the edges softened with time, but as I got closer I realized with a jolt that the face wasn't carved into the bark. It was a natural formation, the bark having grown into that shape over decades or centuries. The mouth-like crevice was large enough to slide my hand into. Something inside me wanted to touch it, to explore that dark opening. I reached out, my fingers just inches from the bark. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice, human and female, startled me so badly I nearly fell over as I spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing was an old woman, thin and wiry, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore hiking clothes that had seen better days and carried a walking stick that looked hand-carved. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Margaret," she replied simply, "and you're lost." It wasn't a question. I nodded, relief flooding through me at the sight of another person. "This place?" I gestured vaguely. "Something's wrong with it." Margaret's face remained expressionless. "This place is exactly what it is. It's you who doesn't belong." She stepped further into the clearing but maintained her distance from both me and the tree. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I didn't find you. I followed you. I've been watching since you set up camp." Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, assessed me. "You shouldn't be here, Ryan Nelson." A chill ran through me. "How do you know my name?" Margaret ignored my question. "The Whispering Pines has been here longer than people. It remembers when the Mohawk and Oneida wouldn't enter these woods. It remembers when the first European settlers disappeared after venturing too deep." She looked at the massive tree. "It remembers everyone who touches it." "What is this place?" I asked, taking a step away from the tree. "And what are you doing here if it's so dangerous?" "I'm its keeper," Margaret said simply. "I watch. I warn when I can. Sometimes I'm too late." She nodded toward the tree. "That's not just a tree. The locals called it the hunger tree. The old tribes believed it was a doorway to another world, a hungry world that feeds on ours. They left offerings to keep it satisfied." I almost laughed, but the absolute seriousness in her weathered face stopped me. "You can't expect me to believe what you want. But you heard the whispers, didn't you? You followed them here. It knows your name." The clearing had grown dimmer, though the sun was still visible overhead. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching toward us like fingers. "We need to leave," Margaret said, suddenly urgent. "It's getting dark soon. My campsite? Forget it. Your gear isn't worth your life. Follow me and stay close." She turned and started walking rapidly back into the trees. I hesitated, looking back at the massive pine with its face-like formation. For a moment, I could have sworn the mouth moved, widening into a grin. "Ryan!" Margaret called sharply. "Now!" I hurried after her. She moved with surprising speed through the forest, her walking stick finding purchase on the uneven ground with practiced ease. I struggled to keep up, my breath coming in gasps. "How far?" I managed to ask. "Not far to the main trail, but we need to hurry. They get active at dusk." "They?" Margaret didn't answer. The forest was growing darker by the minute, the shadows deepening between the trees. The wind picked up, bringing with it that whispering sound again, more urgent now, more numerous, like dozens of voices speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. We reached a small ridge and Margaret paused, looking back the way we'd come. Her face paled. "Run," she said quietly. "Run now." I followed her gaze. Between the trees behind us, shapes moved, tall, thin shapes that seemed to sway like saplings in the wind. But they were moving against the wind, moving purposefully in our direction. "What are they?" I whispered. "The hungry ones," Margaret replied, already moving again. "Those who touched the tree and weren't strong enough to resist. Now they feed it, bring it more." I ran after her, fear giving me speed I didn't know I had. The trail beneath our feet became more defined and I recognized landmarks from my hike in. We were getting close to the main trail. The whispers behind us grew louder, forming words now, clearly audible. "Ryan, stay. Feed. Hunger." I didn't look back. I could hear them moving through the undergrowth, branches snapping, leaves rustling. They were getting closer. Margaret suddenly veered off the path, diving into a dense thicket of younger pines. I followed without question. We crouched there, breathing hard, as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Through gaps in the branches I caught glimpses of them. Tall, emaciated human forms, their skin gray-white like birch bark, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Their faces were blank except for deep, hollow eye sockets and gaping mouths. They paused on the trail, heads swiveling as if sniffing the air. "Don't move," Margaret breathed in my ear. "Don't even breathe loud." One of the creatures turned toward our hiding place, its eyeless face pointing directly at us. It took a step closer, long fingers, too many fingers, reaching out. Suddenly, a deer bolted from further down the trail, startled by something. The creatures immediately gave chase, their movements becoming a blur as they pursued the new prey. Within seconds, they had vanished into the darkening forest. Margaret waited a full minute before moving. "Come on," she whispered, "while they're distracted." We emerged from the thicket and hurried down the trail. The main path appeared ahead, marked by a weathered wooden sign that I hadn't noticed on my way in. The carved letters spelled out "Whispering Pines" with smaller text beneath that I couldn't make out in the fading light. As we reached the sign, Margaret stopped. "This is as far as I go. Follow this path straight out. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't come back here." I stared at her. "You're not coming." She shook her head. "I told you, I'm the keeper, I can't leave. But those things, they won't bother me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag, pressing it into my hand. "Take this. It's a protection charm. Don't open it, just keep it with you until you're well away from here." The bag felt warm in my palm, and something inside shifted when I moved it. It smelled of herbs and something metallic. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Margaret's face softened slightly. "Because you're not meant for the hunger tree. Not yet." A sudden chorus of whispers rose up from the forest behind us, louder and more urgent than before. Margaret's head snapped around. "Go," she commanded. "Now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I ran down the main trail, the small bag clutched tightly in my fist. Behind me, I heard Margaret calling out in a language I didn't recognize, her voice strong and defiant against the rising whispers. I didn't look back. I ran for what felt like miles, though it was probably only 1 or 2. The path seemed longer than I remembered, twisting in ways I hadn't noticed before. Several times I was sure I'd taken a wrong turn, but then a familiar landmark would appear. A lightning-struck tree, a distinctive boulder, confirming I was still on the right path. Night had fully fallen by the time I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. As I slid into the driver's seat, I finally looked back at the dark mass of forest I'd just escaped. Something stood at the edge of the trees. A tall, thin silhouette that might have been a person or might have been something else entirely. It raised one long arm in what could have been a wave or a warning. I started the car and drove away as fast as I dared on the narrow dirt road, the headlights cutting a meager path through the darkness. The small cloth bag sat on the passenger seat, occasionally shifting by itself. Back in Old Forge, I checked into the first motel I saw, a rundown place called the Pinewood Lodge. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. I took a hot shower, trying to wash away not just the dirt but the memory of those whispering voices, the strange footprints, the face in the tree. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. In the dream, she was younger, her silver hair dark brown, her face unlined. She stood before the hunger tree, her arms outstretched as if embracing it. The tree's bark face smiled at her and its mouth opened wider, until it was a doorway large enough to step through. Margaret walked into that darkness, and the mouth closed behind her. I woke, gasping, the motel room spinning around me. It took several minutes to orient myself, to remember where I was and what had happened. The cloth bag sat on the nightstand, still warm to the touch. In the morning, I drove to the coffee shop where I'd met Ellie, the barista who'd told me about Whispering Pines. A different person was working the counter, a young man with a sleeve of tattoos. "Is Ellie working today?" I asked. He frowned. "Who?" "Ellie. She works here. She told me about a hiking trail a couple days ago." The man shook his head. "No Ellie here." "Oh, Ellie. Man, I'm the only morning barista. Have been for 2 years." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. She was here Wednesday morning. Dark hair, green eyes, about my age. The man's expression changed from confusion to something like concern. "Look, there's no Ellie here. Never has been, as far as I know. You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something and left, my coffee forgotten on the counter. Outside, I leaned against the brick wall of the shop, trying to make sense of it all. Had I imagined Ellie? Was I losing my mind? The cloth bag in my pocket pulsed with warmth, as if answering my unasked questions. I drove back to Manhattan that day, the bag sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I thought about throwing it out the window several times, but something stopped me. It was my only proof that what had happened was real. Back in my apartment, I placed the bag in a drawer and tried to forget about the whole experience. I told myself it had been a bad mushroom I'd accidentally ingested, or stress-induced hallucinations, or an elaborate prank. None of those explanations quite fit, but they were better than the alternative. That the Whispering Pines was real, that the hunger tree was real, that Margaret was real. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the drawer and took out the cloth bag. It was still warm. I loosened the drawstring and carefully emptied the contents onto my palm. Inside was a small carved figure, about 2 inches tall, made from dark wood that looked very old. It depicted a human form with exaggerated features, long limbs, an oversized head, a wide mouth carved in a permanent scream. Wrapped around the figure was a single silver hair, tied in a complex knot. As I examined it, my phone chimed with an email notification. I set the figure down and checked my phone. The email was from an address I didn't recognize, bem.keeper.whisperingpines.net. The subject line read simply, "Don't come back." The body of the email contained just one line, "It's still hungry, Ryan, and it remembers you." I deleted the email immediately, but I couldn't delete the memory of those whispers in the pines, calling my name, inviting me deeper. Sometimes, late at night in my Manhattan apartment, with the city noise a dull roar outside my window, I still hear them, and sometimes I find myself looking at hiking trails in the Adirondacks, wondering if the hunger tree is still waiting for me. I keep the carved figure on my nightstand now. It's the only thing that seems to quiet the whispers. But lately, I've noticed something disturbing. The figure seems to be changing. Its wooden limbs growing longer, its screaming mouth widening day by day, and sometimes, when I wake in the night, I could swear it's moved closer to my bed. I don't know how much longer the charm will protect me. Margaret said I wasn't meant for the hunger tree yet. The implication of that "yet" haunts me. I've thought about returning to the Whispering Pines, about finding Margaret again and demanding answers. But I know that's exactly what it wants, to lure me back, to finish what it started. So I stay in the city, surrounded by steel and concrete and 8 million souls. I tell myself I'm safe here, that the hunger tree and its servants can't reach me. But deep down, I know the truth. The Whispering Pines isn't just a place. It's something older, something patient, and it knows my name. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the dense, forgotten corners of the Adirondack Mountains, where the trees grow so thick they blot out the sun and the silence is a living thing. I've always been drawn to remote places. Something about the solitude speaks to me in ways other people can't understand. My girlfriend Stephanie and I had been together for almost 2 years, and I thought I knew everything about her. Her laugh that started soft and built like a wave, the way she'd run her fingers through her hair when she was thinking, the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike as a kid. But there are things you never learn about someone until you see them afraid. Really afraid. We'd been planning this trip for months. 5 days of hiking through the High Peaks wilderness near Lake Placid. We'd read about Whiteface Mountain and the Ausable River, studied maps of Avalanche Lake, and packed all the gear we could reasonably carry. Stephanie was the organized one, with her color-coded lists and backup plans. I was just along for the adventure, carrying most of the heavy stuff and promising her it would be romantic. "It'll be good for us," I'd told her. "No phones, no emails, no distractions, just us." She'd smiled at that, but looking back, I should have noticed the hesitation in her eyes, the way her mouth tightened just slightly at the corners. "What about bears?" she'd asked. "We'll hang our food," I'd replied. "Besides, black bears aren't aggressive unless you get between a mother and her cubs. And if we do, we won't." I was so certain, so arrogant in my certainty. The mountains had always been kind to me before. We arrived at the trailhead on a Tuesday morning in late September. The air was crisp, carrying that distinct scent of autumn, decaying leaves and damp earth. The forecast had promised clear skies, but already clouds were gathering above the distant peaks, dark and brooding. "Should we be worried about that?" Stephanie asked, pointing to the horizon. "Nah," I said, shouldering my pack. "Those are miles away. Probably won't hit until tomorrow, if at all." The first day's hike was strenuous but beautiful. 6 miles of steady climbing through forests of maple, birch, and pine. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of red and gold among the green. We saw a few other hikers early on, exchanged nods and brief hellos, but by mid-afternoon, we had the trail to ourselves. We made camp near a small stream, our tent nestled in a grove of white pines that creaked and whispered in the gentle breeze. As darkness fell, we sat by a small fire, eating dehydrated pasta and talking about everything and nothing. Above us, stars pricked through the gaps in the forest canopy, brilliant against the black void. "This is nice," Stephanie said, leaning against me. "I'm glad we came." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "Told you so." If only I'd known that would be our last peaceful moment together. The wind picked up during the night, not gradually but suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. It howled through the trees, a high, keening sound that worked its way into my dreams. I woke to find Stephanie already sitting up, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Michael," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Do you hear that?" I was about to say it was just the wind, but then I heard it too. Beneath the howling, a different sound. A voice calling out, "Help. Please. Someone." It was distant, muffled by the wind and trees, but unmistakably human. "Someone's out there," Stephanie said, already reaching for her shoes. "Wait," I grabbed her arm. "We don't know where they are or what's happening. It could be dangerous." "Someone needs help, Michael." The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, help me." I reluctantly pulled on my boots and jacket and grabbed our flashlight. The beam cut a pale swath through the darkness as we stepped outside the tent. "Hello?" I called. "Where are you?" For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind. Then, "Here. I'm here." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the trees. We moved cautiously away from our tent, following the sound as best we could. "Be careful," I said, scanning the ground ahead with the flashlight. "The terrain is treacherous at night." We'd gone perhaps 50 yards from our camp when Stephanie suddenly stopped. "Michael," she said, her voice barely audible. "Look." The flashlight beam had caught something reflective. Two somethings, glowing in the darkness between the trees. Eyes watching us. Not animal eyes, too high off the ground for that. Human eyes, but with a strange greenish luminescence. "Hello?" I called again, my voice cracking slightly. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and then were gone. "Did you see that?" Stephanie's fingers dug into my arm. "It was probably just a hiker," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The light reflecting off their glasses or something. At night? In the middle of nowhere?" Before I could answer, a scream tore through the forest, a horrible, agonized sound that made my blood run cold. It went on, rising in pitch until it was almost beyond human range, then, abruptly, cut off. Stephanie and I stood frozen, our breath fogging in the cold air. "We should go back," I said quietly. "What about whoever's out there? They need help." "Steph, I don't think—" The wind died suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. Then, directly behind us, a voice whispered, "Too late for help now." We whirled around, but there was no one there, just darkness and trees. We ran back to our camp, stumbling over roots and rocks, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. When we reached the tent, Stephanie immediately started shoving things into her backpack. "What are you doing?" I asked. "We need to leave, now." "It's the middle of the night. We can't hike out in the dark. We can't stay here either." Her voice was shaking, but her hands were steady as she packed. "Steph, listen to me." I put my hands on her shoulders. It was probably just some locals messing with us. They saw our campfire and decided to have some fun scaring the city folks. That wasn't someone having fun. Michael, you heard that scream. It could have been an animal, a fox or something. They can make weird sounds. She looked at me, her face pale in the flashlight's glow. "You don't believe that?" I didn't, not really, but I also didn't want to hike through unfamiliar wilderness in the dark. "Look, we'll pack up at first light, okay? But right now, the safest thing is to stay put." After some argument, she reluctantly agreed. We brought our backpacks into the tent with us and zipped the door shut. I kept the flashlight on and placed my hunting knife within easy reach. Neither of us suggested trying to sleep again. We sat in tense silence as the hours crept by. Occasionally, we'd hear noises outside, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, but each time I'd shine the flashlight out through the tent fabric and see nothing. Just before dawn, Stephanie gasped and grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the tent wall. A shadow was moving across it, the unmistakable silhouette of a person standing just outside. Not moving, just standing there, watching. My mouth went dry. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. "Who's there?" The shadow didn't move or respond. I unzipped the tent door a few inches and peered out. The clearing was empty, the trees still except for the gentle morning breeze. But when I looked down, my heart nearly stopped. Footprints in the soft earth, leading up to our tent and circling it. Not hiking boots or sneakers, but bare feet, unnaturally long and narrow, with what looked like claws instead of toes. I quickly zipped the tent closed again. "What is it?" Stephanie asked. "Nothing," I lied. "Probably just shadows from the trees." As soon as there was enough light to see, we packed up and left, not even bothering with breakfast. Neither of us spoke about what had happened during the night. I think we both hoped that in the daylight, it would seem less real, less terrifying, just tricks of the wind and darkness. Our plan had been to hike deeper into the wilderness that day, but without discussion, we turned back toward the trailhead. We walked quickly, stopping only when absolutely necessary. The forest that had seemed so beautiful the day before now felt oppressive, watchful. Around mid-morning, we came to a fork in the trail that I didn't remember from the day before. "This wasn't here," I said, studying our map in confusion. "We should be on the Avalanche Pass trail, but this doesn't match up." "Maybe we took a wrong turn earlier." "No, I've been following the trail markers." But looking around, I realized there were no trail markers visible. No blue blazes on the trees, no cairns, nothing. "Let me check the GPS," I said, pulling out my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising, but the GPS should still work. Except it didn't. The screen showed our location as being miles away from where we should be, in a part of the park with no established trails. "That's not right," I muttered, restarting the app. Same result. "Michael," Stephanie said quietly, "I think we're lost." "We're not lost. We just need to backtrack to the last place we were certain of our location." But as we turned around, I felt a growing sense of unease. The trail behind us now split in 3 directions, none of which looked familiar. "This isn't possible," I said. "What's happening?" Stephanie's voice had that tight quality again, fear struggling against control. Before I could answer, we heard it. The same voice from the night before, but closer now, clearer. "Lost in the woods, lost in the woods, never find your way out." It was sing-song, mocking, coming from somewhere in the trees to our right. "Who's there?" I shouted. "This isn't funny." No response, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "We need to keep moving," I said, choosing the path that seemed to head east, toward where the trailhead should be. We walked for hours, the sun climbing and then beginning its descent, but the forest remained unfamiliar. No landmarks I recognized, no signs of the trail we'd followed the day before. Worse, I had the constant crawling sensation that we were being watched, followed. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, but when I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there. Once, I thought I saw a figure standing between 2 distant trees, tall and thin, with limbs that didn't bend quite right, but it vanished when I tried to focus on it. Stephanie saw it too. I could tell by the way her breathing changed, becoming quick and shallow, but neither of us acknowledged it aloud, as if naming the thing might somehow make it more real. As the day wore on, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks massive and gnarled. The undergrowth thickened, forcing us to push through tangles of brush that seemed to grab at our clothes and skin. And it got quieter. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the leaves. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. "We should have reached the trailhead by now," Stephanie said as the light began to fade. "Or at least crossed one of the marked trails." I checked my watch. We'd been walking for over 8 hours. Even if we'd gone completely off course, we should have hit something. A trail, a road, a sign of civilization. The Adirondack Park was big, but it wasn't endless. "We need to make camp," I said reluctantly. "It's getting dark." "Here?" Stephanie looked around nervously. "Can't we keep going a little longer?" "Not safely. We don't want to risk injury, especially now." We found a small clearing and set up the tent, working quickly as the last of the daylight drained away. I tried to start a fire, but the wood was damp and refused to catch. After several failed attempts, I gave up. We ate energy bars and beef jerky in the tent, neither of us very hungry despite the day's exertion. As night fully descended, the forest came alive with sounds. Rustlings, whispers, occasional moans that might have been the wind through the trees but didn't sound quite right. "Tell me what's happening," Stephanie said suddenly. "And don't say it's nothing, or that I'm imagining things. Please." I looked at her in the dim light of the flashlight. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and fear, but her eyes were steady. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I don't think we're alone out here." "Do you think it's a person? Someone following us?" I hesitated. "I don't think it's human, not entirely." She nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something she already suspected. "I grew up near here, you know. Not in these mountains exactly, but close enough. There were stories." "What kind of stories?" "About the woods, about things that lived in them. Things that looked almost human, but weren't. The old-timers called them the hollow ones because they were empty inside. No soul, no heart, nothing but hunger." "You never mentioned this before." "Because they're just stories, Michael. Or they were supposed to be." She hugged her knees to her chest. "The hollow ones were said to lure hikers off the trails, make them lost. They'd create false paths, move trail markers, whisper in voices that sounded like calls for help. And once they had you turned around and confused—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "My grandmother used to warn me never to go into the deep woods alone," she continued. "She said if I ever got lost, I should find running water and follow it downstream. The hollow ones can't cross moving water, supposedly." Under normal circumstances, I might have scoffed at such superstitions. But after what we'd experienced, I was willing to consider anything. "There was a stream not far back," I said. "We passed it maybe an hour before making camp. If we—" A sudden thud against the side of the tent cut me off. We both jumped, and I grabbed the flashlight, swinging it toward the sound. Nothing visible, but the fabric of the tent was pressed inward, as if something was leaning against it, or pressing its face to it, listening. Then came a voice, not the sing-song taunting from before, but a perfect imitation of my own. "There was a stream not far back. We passed it maybe an hour before making camp." The words were exactly the same, my exact inflection, but there was something wrong about it, something hollow. Stephanie's hand found mine in the darkness and squeezed hard. "If we," the voice continued, still in my stolen tones, "run very, very fast, maybe the hollow ones won't catch us." A high, tittering laugh followed, nothing like any sound I'd ever made. Then, in Stephanie's voice, "Michael, I'm afraid." And in mine again, "You should be." Something sharp, a finger, a claw, pressed against the tent fabric, dragging slowly downward with a sound like tearing silk. "Don't move," I whispered to Stephanie, though she was already frozen in place. "Don't make a sound." Whatever was outside circled the tent slowly, occasionally pressing against it, occasionally mimicking our voices with snatches of the conversation we'd just had. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the presence withdrew, the forest falling silent again. We spent the night pressed together in the center of the tent as far from the walls as possible, listening to every sound. Neither of us slept. By unspoken agreement, we didn't talk again, afraid of giving the thing outside more of our voices to steal. When dawn finally came, we packed quickly and silently. The tent had 4 long gashes down one side, as if made by sharp claws. Outside, the same strange footprints circled our campsite. We headed back in the direction of the stream Stephanie had mentioned, moving as fast as the rough terrain would allow. The forest seemed even stranger in the daylight. The trees too twisted, the shadows too deep, the distances between things somehow wrong. Several times I caught glimpses of figures moving parallel to us among the trees, tall, thin shapes that walked with a jerking, uneven gait. Each time I tried to point them out to Stephanie, they would vanish, only to reappear elsewhere moments later. We found the stream around mid-morning, a narrow ribbon of water cutting through the forest floor, gurgling over rocks and roots. Without hesitation, we waded in and began following it downstream. The water was cold enough to numb our feet within minutes, but neither of us suggested leaving the stream bed. Whether the hollow ones could cross moving water or not, this was our only sure path, our only hope of finding our way out of the endless woods. We walked in the stream for hours, our legs aching, our feet blistered and raw inside our sodden boots, but the forest around us gradually began to change. The trees less ancient and gnarled, the undergrowth less dense, occasional glimpses of sky visible through the canopy. Near what I guessed was late afternoon, we spotted something ahead, a bridge, crossing the now wider stream. A man-made structure which meant people, which meant safety. "We made it," Stephanie said, the first words either of us had spoken all day. Relief made her voice crack. We hurried toward the bridge, splashing through the shallows. But as we got closer, something made me slow down. A growing sense of wrongness. The bridge was old, far older than it should have been. Not the modern wood and metal construction you'd expect in a state park, but rough-hewn logs lashed together with what looked like sinew, not rope, and there was something on it. A figure, standing perfectly still in the center. I put out an arm to stop Stephanie. "Wait!" The figure on the bridge was human-shaped but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. Too tall, too thin, its limbs at odd angles. It wore what might once have been hiking clothes, now tattered and filthy. Its face, I couldn't make sense of its face. It seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, features rearranging themselves like they couldn't settle on a single configuration. "That's not a bridge," Stephanie whispered, clutching my arm. "Not a real one. And that's not a person." The figure's head turned toward us with a jerky, mechanical motion. Its mouth opened, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp. "Lost in the woods," it called in that horrible sing-song voice. "Come cross my bridge, little ones. Come find your way home." "Run," I said to Stephanie, not taking my eyes off the thing on the bridge. "Back upstream, now. I'm not leaving you. I'll be right behind you. Go." The creature on the bridge began to move toward us, its gait a jerky, skittering thing like a spider walking on its hind legs. As it moved, more figures emerged from the trees on either side, similar but each uniquely wrong, a grotesque parody of humanity. Stephanie and I turned and ran, splashing back upstream as fast as we could. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creatures were following, not in the water, but along the banks, moving with that same jerky, too-fast gait. And they were gaining on us. "They can't cross the water," I gasped to Stephanie. "But they can outrun us on land." "There," she pointed ahead to where the stream widened into a series of rapids cascading over rocks. "We can cross there, get to the other side." It was risky. The current looked strong, the rocks slippery, but staying on our current path meant being overtaken. We reached the rapids and began to cross, leaping from rock to rock, the cold water spraying around us. I went first, turning to help Stephanie when I reached the middle. She was right behind me, her face set with determination. But as she jumped to the rock where I stood, her foot slipped on the wet surface. I grabbed for her, caught her wrist, but her momentum pulled us both off balance. We fell into the churning water. The shock of it drove the breath from my lungs. It was like being plunged into ice. The current immediately swept us downstream, tumbling us over rocks and through rapids. I fought to keep my head above water to keep hold of Stephanie, but the force of the water was too strong. Our hands were torn apart. The last thing I saw was her face, white with terror, before she disappeared beneath the surface. "Stephanie!" I screamed, but the water filled my mouth, choking me. I don't know how long I was in the river. Time lost all meaning in the struggle to survive, to not be dashed against rocks or drowned in the churning rapids. Eventually, the stream widened and slowed, and I managed to drag myself onto the bank, coughing up water, my body one massive bruise. "Stephanie!" I called again, staggering to my feet. "Stephanie!" Nothing but the gentle gurgle of the stream and the rustle of leaves. I searched the banks downstream, moving as quickly as my battered body would allow, calling her name until my voice was hoarse. No sign of her. No response. As darkness began to fall again, I was faced with an impossible choice. Continue searching in the dark, risking my own life, or find shelter for the night and resume at first light. With a leaden heart, I chose the latter. I found a rocky overhang nearby and huddled beneath it, shivering in my wet clothes, listening to the forest around me. The strange whispers and movements seemed to be gone, either left behind when we crossed the stream or perhaps never existing on this side at all. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed me. I dreamed of Stephanie, not drowning, but walking through the forest on the other side of the stream, following something that wore my face and spoke with my voice. I woke to morning light and the sound of voices, human voices, calling out. "Hello, is someone there?" I shouted, scrambling out from under the overhang. 3 figures emerged from the trees, park rangers in uniform looking surprised to see me. "Sir, are you Michael Williams?" one of them asked. Yes, my girlfriend, Stephanie. She fell in the stream. We have to find her." The rangers exchanged glances. "Sir," the one who'd spoken said gently, "we've been searching for you for 2 days. Your girlfriend reported you missing when you didn't return from your solo hike." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "No, Stephanie was with me. We got lost. We were being followed by something." "Sir, Ms. Nguyen has been at the ranger station since Wednesday morning. She said you went for an early hike on Tuesday and never came back to your campsite." "That's not possible. She was with me the whole time." But even as I said it, doubt began to creep in. The memories of the past 2 days suddenly seemed fuzzy, dreamlike. Had Stephanie really been with me? Or had I been alone, lost and hallucinating from fear and exhaustion? Or worse, had something else been with me? Something that could take on her appearance, her voice? I let the rangers lead me back to civilization, too confused and exhausted to argue. They told me I'd somehow wandered miles off any marked trail, into a part of the park rarely visited. When asked how I'd gotten there, I couldn't give a coherent answer. At the ranger station, Stephanie was waiting. The real Stephanie, with tears in her eyes and relief on her face. She ran to me, embraced me, her body solid and warm and undeniably real. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost you too," I replied, holding her tightly. Later, when we were alone, I tried to explain what had happened, what I'd experienced. The false trails, the voices, the creatures that weren't quite human. "It wasn't me," she said, her expression troubled. "I never left the campsite. I woke up and you were gone. Your boots and jacket were missing, but nothing else. I waited for hours, then hiked back to get help." "But it was so real," I insisted. "You were there. We talked. I trailed off, remembering something. Stephanie telling me she'd grown up near the mountains, that she knew the stories of the Hollow Ones. But that wasn't true. The real Stephanie had grown up in California, had never set foot in the Adirondacks before this trip. A chill ran through me. What else hadn't been real? What had I actually experienced out there in the woods? And what had been something else? The authorities attributed my experience to confusion and exposure. A simple case of a hiker getting lost and succumbing to fear and exhaustion. The medical examination showed no injuries beyond scrapes and bruises, though my core temperature was strangely low, as if I'd been cold for a very long time. We drove home 2 days later, neither of us suggesting we continue our vacation. As we passed the turnoff for the High Peaks Wilderness, I glanced out the window at the distant mountains. For just a moment, I thought I saw something standing at the tree line. A tall, thin figure with limbs that bent wrong, watching our car pass. "Michael," Stephanie asked, noticing my sudden tension. "What is it?" I shook my head and kept driving. "Nothing, just shadows." But sometimes, even now, months later, I wake in the night to the sound of whispers. My own voice, Stephanie's voice, saying things we never said. And in the darkest hours before dawn, I wonder what exactly followed me home from those ancient woods. Because the hollow ones are patient. They can wait a very long time for what they want, and they remember your voice. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains, in a rarely visited area near Balsam Mountain in New York. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I've always been something of a loner. After my divorce 2 years ago, I threw myself into my work as a software developer, coding for a financial firm in Manhattan. The constant pressure of deadlines and the artificial glow of monitors became my entire world. My therapist suggested I reconnect with nature, something I hadn't done since Boy Scouts. "The wilderness will help you find yourself again," she said. If only she knew what I would actually find out there. I planned meticulously for my solo hiking trip. 5 days in the remote High Peaks Wilderness area, with a route that would take me through some of the most isolated terrain in the Northeast. I had top-of-the-line gear, survival training refreshers from YouTube, and enough freeze-dried food to last a week. What I didn't have was experience with the particular darkness that dwells in those ancient mountains. The first day went perfectly. The October air was crisp but not uncomfortable, and the fall foliage created a kaleidoscope of red and gold against the deep blue sky. I made good time on the trail, covering almost 12 miles before setting up camp near a small stream. That night, I fell asleep to the gentle sound of rushing water, feeling more peaceful than I had in months. The trouble began on the second day. I woke to find my hiking boots filled with water, despite being well away from the stream and inside my tent. Annoyed, but not alarmed, I chalked it up to morning dew or a leak in my tent, dried them as best I could with my camping towel, and set off again. Around midday, I noticed the birdsong had stopped. The forest, which had been alive with sound, fell into an unnatural silence. The only noise was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and my own breathing, which suddenly seemed too loud in the quiet. A sense of being watched settled over me, that prickling feeling on the back of your neck that triggers something primal in your brain. I turned around several times, expecting to see another hiker or perhaps a deer, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows that seemed to bend in unnatural ways when viewed from the corner of my eye. I quickened my pace, telling myself I was being ridiculous. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing that overlooked a vast valley. According to my map, the Blackwater Creek Trail shelter should have been visible from this vantage point, but I couldn't see it. I checked and rechecked my GPS, which showed I was exactly where I should be, but the shelter was simply not there. Night was approaching, and with it came a bone-deep cold that hadn't been forecasted. I decided to make camp and figure out the discrepancy in the morning. As I set up my tent, I noticed strange markings carved into a nearby tree, symbols I didn't recognize, angular and almost runic, carved deep into the bark. They looked old, the edges weathered, but somehow I was certain they hadn't been there when I first entered the clearing. I tried to dismiss the unease building in my chest. I'd come out here to clear my head, not to let my imagination run wild. I cooked a simple meal on my portable stove and watched as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in hues of purple and deep blue before surrendering to darkness. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a voice that sounded almost human, a distant wailing that rose and fell with unsettling regularity. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag and tried to focus on the flickering light of my small lantern. Sleep evaded me for hours, but eventually, exhaustion won out. I dreamed of eyes watching me from between the trees. Not animal eyes, but something else, something old. In the dream, I tried to run, but my legs moved as if through molasses, and the eyes came closer, blinking in and out of existence with each step. A sharp crack woke me. My tent was bathed in the pale light of early dawn, and for a moment, I thought the sound had been part of my dream. Then it came again, a twig snapping just outside my tent. I held my breath, listening. Footsteps circled my tent, too rhythmic to be an animal, too heavy to be anything but human. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly thin with fear. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. I fumbled for my phone, but the battery, which had been at 80% when I went to sleep, was completely drained. My flashlight still worked, thankfully, and I turned it on, pointing it at the tent wall. The beam illuminated a silhouette on the fabric, a tall, unnaturally thin figure standing motionless. My blood turned to ice as I watched it raise one elongated arm, finger outstretched, and begin to trace something on my tent. A symbol, like the ones on the tree. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the silhouette vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. As if it had never been there at all. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as there was light enough to see, I packed up my gear with trembling hands. The tent fabric where I'd seen the figure showed no marks, no tears, nothing to indicate anyone had touched it. Had I dreamed the whole thing? Was I cracking under the stress of being alone in the wilderness? I decided to abandon my original plan and head back the way I came. My nerves were shot, and I no longer trusted myself to make good decisions if I continued deeper into the mountains. But as I consulted my map and GPS, my stomach dropped. The trail I had followed was no longer marked on the map. Instead, there was just solid green, indicating untrailed wilderness. My GPS showed me in a completely different location than the day before, despite the fact that I hadn't moved camp. I fought down rising panic. This was impossible. Maps don't change overnight. GPS doesn't just relocate you miles from where you were. I took several deep breaths trying to center myself. There had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps I had downloaded the wrong map, or my GPS was malfunctioning due to the mountains. I decided to follow my compass instead, heading east. I knew that eventually I would hit a road or a trail that would lead me back to civilization. As I shouldered my pack and set off, I noticed more of those strange symbols carved into the trees, forming a line that seemed to lead in the direction I was planning to go. Had they been there yesterday? I couldn't be sure. The day grew oddly warm for October, and soon I was sweating profusely. My water supplies were dwindling faster than they should have been, and the terrain seemed unfamiliar, despite the fact that I should have been retracing my steps. The trees looked wrong somehow, twisted and gnarled in ways I didn't remember. The ground felt spongier underfoot, and the air had a sweet, rotting smell that made my stomach churn. By midday, I knew with absolute certainty that I was lost. The compass needle spun erratically, sometimes rotating in full circles before settling briefly and then spinning again. My map showed features that weren't there and omitted ones that were. My GPS continued to place me in locations that made no sense given the terrain around me. I tried not to think about the stories I'd read about people who vanished in national parks, about search parties that found empty tents and abandoned gear but no trace of the missing hikers. I tried not to think about how easy it would be to disappear out here, to become another statistic, another mystery. As the afternoon wore on, the forest grew denser, the trees pressing in from all sides. The sun, which should have been high and bright, seemed dim and distant, as if I were seeing it through a filter. Shadows stretched in impossible directions, some pointing toward the sun rather than away from it. Then I heard it, a voice calling my name. William. Just that. My name, spoken softly but clearly, from somewhere among the trees. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello," I called back, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" Silence. then from a different direction. "William." I spun around, trying to locate the source. "Who are you? What do you want?" This time, the response came from directly behind me. "You." I whirled, but there was no one there. Just trees and shadows in the oppressive silence of the forest. I began to run, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, and then I ran some more. Finally, I stumbled into another clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. As my vision cleared and my breathing slowed, I realized I was not alone. A figure stood at the far edge of the clearing, half hidden by the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall, and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was the color of ash, and it wore tattered clothing that might once have been hiking gear but now hung in decaying strips from its frame. Its face. God. Its face. Where there should have been features, there was only smooth, blank skin, interrupted by a single vertical slit where a mouth should be. I knew, somehow, that this was the thing that had stood outside my tent the night before. The thing that had been following me, calling my name. In the folklore of the region, they called it the wendigo. A spirit of hunger and winter, of isolation and madness. But names didn't matter now. All that mattered was that it was real, and it was here, and it wanted me. "William," it said again, the vertical slit opening and closing with the word, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "You're lost." I couldn't move. Fear had turned my muscles to stone. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "I can help you find your way," it continued, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I know these woods. I've always known these woods." "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. The slit widened in what might have been a smile. "Company," it said. "It gets lonely here. No one stays. They all leave eventually, or they die. But you could stay. You could be like me." It took another step forward, and another. Each movement brought it closer, and with each step, I felt a cold dread spreading through my body. "I don't want to stay," I said, finally finding the strength to back away. "I want to go home." The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that made it all the more terrifying. "Home," it repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, home. I had a home once, a family, a name. Thomas Davis. That was my name. Before." Thomas Davis. The name sent a jolt through me. I had read about a hiker by that name who had gone missing in these mountains almost 30 years ago. They never found his body. "You're not Thomas Davis," I said, continuing to back away. "Thomas Davis is dead." The creature's mouth slit stretched wider. "Yes," it agreed, "dead, but not gone, never gone. The mountains keep you, change you, and if you stay long enough you become something else." I felt my back hit a tree. There was nowhere left to retreat. The creature was now only a few yards away, close enough that I could smell it, a scent like wet earth and rotting leaves and something metallic that might have been blood. "I found others before you," it continued, its voice taking on an almost conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than if it had been threatening. "A woman, 2 summers ago. She fought harder than you, and before that, a couple. The man tried to protect the woman. It didn't help." My mind raced, connecting the dots. There had been news stories about missing hikers in this region over the years, cases that were never solved, people who went into the wilderness and never came out again. "Why me?" I asked, playing for time as I slowly reached for the hunting knife strapped to my belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. The creature seemed to consider the question. "You were alone, sad, empty inside. The mountains call to people like you, people who are already halfway to becoming shadows themselves." It was right. After my divorce, I had felt like a ghost in my own life, going through the motions without any real connection or purpose. Had that emptiness somehow drawn this thing to me? Had I unknowingly invited this nightmare? The creature's hand shot out faster than my eye could track and closed around my wrist, stopping my reach for the knife. Its touch was ice-cold and dry, like holding the hand of a corpse. "Don't," it said simply. "It won't help." I tried to pull away, but its grip was like iron. "Let me go." The slit mouth curved upward. "I will, eventually, when you're ready, when you're like me." With its free hand, it reached toward my face. I turned my head away, squeezing my eyes shut, waiting for pain, for death, for whatever horror was to come next. Instead, I felt a gentle touch on my cheek, almost tender. "Open your eyes, William," the creature whispered. "See what you will become." Against my better judgment, I looked. The creature's blank face was inches from mine, the vertical slit now open wide enough to reveal the darkness inside. But what made my heart stop was what I saw reflected in that darkness. My own face, but changed. Gaunt, pale, with empty black eyes and a mouth that was beginning to stretch vertically rather than horizontally. "No," I breathed. "No, that's not me. That will never be me." The creature, Thomas, or what had once been Thomas, tilted its head again. "It already is you," it said. "It has been since you entered these woods, since you felt the emptiness inside you resonating with the emptiness of this place. You belong here now, with me, with us." At those words, I became aware of movement in the trees surrounding the clearing. Shapes shifting in the shadows, tall and thin like the creature before me. More of them. How many, I couldn't tell, but I sensed there were many. All watching, all waiting. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not my sanity, though that was certainly fraying at the edges, but the paralyzing fear that had held me in place. With a strength born of pure desperation, I twisted in the creature's grip and in the same motion brought my knee up hard into what would have been its midsection if it had been human. The creature made a sound, a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge, and its grip loosened just enough for me to wrench my hand free. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Not in any particular direction, just away from that clearing, away from those watching shapes, away from the thing that had once been Thomas Davis. I ran as if all the demons of hell were at my heels, and perhaps they were. The forest seemed to fight against me, branches reaching out to snag my clothing, roots rising up to trip my feet. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, not crashing through underbrush as a human would make, but a soft, whispering sound, like wind through dry leaves. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmare forest. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps it was the other way around. The light didn't change, stuck in that eerie half-dusk that had pervaded the woods all day. Eventually, I broke through a line of trees and found myself standing at the edge of a lake, a black mirror reflecting the clouded sky above. I didn't recognize it, couldn't place it on any mental map of the area, but it offered a direction, a path to follow. I turned and began to run along the shoreline, hoping it would lead to a road, a cabin, any sign of human presence. The whispers behind me grew louder, closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. They were there, a dozen or more of the tall, thin figures moving through the trees with an unnatural grace, gaining on me with each passing second. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. Just ahead, the shoreline curved around a jutting peninsula. If I could reach it, perhaps I could find somewhere to hide, or at least put some distance between myself and my pursuers. As I rounded the bend, I saw it, a small cabin set back from the shore, its windows dark, its wooden sides weathered by years of exposure to the elements. It looked abandoned, but I didn't care. Any shelter was better than none. I staggered toward the cabin, my strength nearly gone. Behind me, the whispers had fallen silent, which somehow was worse than hearing them. Had they given up? Or were they simply closing in for the kill? The cabin door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar as if waiting for me. I pushed it open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me and dropping the rusted bolt into place. For what little good it would do against creatures that seemed more spirit than flesh. The interior of the cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with a small table, a chair, and a narrow bed covered in a dusty blanket. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold ashes in its grate suggesting it hadn't been used in some time. I collapsed onto the chair, my legs finally giving out. I needed to think, to plan. There had to be a way out of this nightmare, but my mind was a jumble of terror and exhaustion, incapable of forming coherent thoughts. A scratching sound came from outside, nails or claws or something worse dragging along the wooden walls of the cabin. I held my breath, listening as the sound circled the building, testing, searching for a way in. "William," came the whisper, seeping through the cracks in the walls like smoke. "You can't hide from us. Not here, not anywhere in these mountains." I didn't respond. Maybe if I stayed quiet, they would think the cabin was empty, move on to search elsewhere. It was a desperate hope, but hope was all I had left. The scratching stopped at the window, a small, dirt-streaked pane of glass that offered little view of the outside world. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, with a sound like breaking ice, a finger, impossibly long and thin, punched through the glass, creating a small hole. An eye appeared at the hole. Not human, but a swirling vortex of darkness that somehow conveyed the sense of watching, of seeing me huddled on the chair. "Found you," whispered the voice, and now it seemed to come from inside my own head rather than from outside the cabin. I leapt to my feet, looking frantically around the small space for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes fell on the fireplace where a heavy iron poker leaned against the stone. I grabbed it, its weight reassuring in my hands. The window shattered inward as a hand, if such an abomination could be called a hand, reached through, fingers elongating impossibly to grasp at the air inches from my face. I swung the poker with all my strength, connecting with the wrist of the thing. There was a sound like dry branches breaking, and the hand withdrew, accompanied by that same keening wail I had heard in the clearing. But my victory was short-lived. The door began to shake, the bolt rattling in its housing as something threw its weight against the wood. I backed up against the fireplace, poker raised, waiting. The door wouldn't hold for long. The wood was old, rotted in places. Already I could see splinters flying as each impact weakened it further. My gaze fell on a small shelf above the fireplace where a few dusty objects sat. A tin cup, a tarnished hunting knife, and a book. Not just any book, but what appeared to be a journal, its leather cover cracked with age. With one hand still gripping the poker, I reached for the journal and flipped it open. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. The first entry was dated October 12, 1991, and signed Thomas Davis. My blood ran cold. This was his cabin, the hiker who had disappeared, who had become that thing outside. With trembling hands, I skimmed the entries, searching for anything that might help me. The journal detailed Davis's own encounter with the wendigo, his gradual transformation, his desperate attempts to resist the change. The final entries became increasingly disjointed, the handwriting deteriorating into scrawls that barely resembled letters. But there, on the last page, was something useful. A crude drawing of a symbol, and beside it the words, "Protector's Sign," and "Keeps them at bay." The symbol looked similar to the ones I had seen carved into the trees, but with subtle differences. If Davis's ramblings were to be believed, this version of the symbol could repel the creatures rather than attract them. The door gave with a splintering crack, and I dropped the journal, raising the poker once more. The creatures poured into the cabin. 3, 4, 5 of them, their elongated bodies seeming to distort the very space around them. At their center was the one that had called itself Thomas, its blank face somehow radiating triumph. "Nowhere left to run," it said, the slit mouth widening. "Nowhere left to hide. Time to join us, William. Time to become part of the mountain. I backed up until I felt the stone of the fireplace pressing against my spine. The creatures advanced slowly, savoring my fear, confident in my capture. My eyes darted around, seeking any escape, any weapon more effective than the poker in my hands. My gaze fell on the hunting knife still sitting on the shelf. Desperate, I grabbed it and, in the same motion, slashed my palm open. Blood welled up, bright red in the dim light of the cabin. The creatures hesitated, heads tilting in unison like curious birds. I used the moment to dip my finger in my own blood and begin tracing the symbol from Davis's journal on the stone of the fireplace, a series of interconnected lines and curves that my hand seemed to remember even though my mind had only glimpsed it briefly. "No," hissed Thomas, suddenly understanding my intent. He lunged forward, but too late. I completed the symbol, my bloody fingerprint marking the final point. For a moment, nothing happened. The creatures continued their advance, and I prepared myself for the end, gripping the poker in one hand and the knife in the other, determined to go down fighting. Then the symbol began to glow. Not with light exactly, but with a sort of anti-darkness that pushed back the shadows in the cabin. The creatures recoiled, their blank faces contorting in what could only be described as pain. "This isn't over," Thomas said, his voice no longer a whisper but a harsh croak. "The mountain has claimed you. You'll never truly leave. Even if you escape today, part of you will remain here, and that part will grow until it calls you back." With that, the creatures retreated, flowing out the broken door like smoke in a strong wind. I stood frozen, not trusting their retreat, waiting for them to return at any moment. But they did not return. The symbol continued to pulse with that strange anti-darkness, creating a dome of protection around the cabin. I sank to my knees, the adrenaline draining from my system, leaving me weak and shaking. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, pale sunlight was streaming through the broken window and door. Morning had come somehow. I had survived the night. With daylight came a certain clarity. I still needed to get out of these mountains to find my way back to civilization. But now I had a weapon of sorts: knowledge. I tore the page with the symbol from Davis's journal and pocketed it, along with the hunting knife. The journal itself I left. Its madness was not something I wanted to carry with me. Outside the cabin, the forest looked different in the light of day. Still eerie, still wrong somehow, but less overtly threatening. I studied my surroundings with a clearer eye and realized that the lake must be Lake Tyr of the Clouds, which meant I was near Mount Marcy. If I followed the lake's outlet, it would eventually lead me to the Hudson River, and from there, I could find my way to a road or a town. I set off with renewed determination, pausing only to carve the protective symbol into trees at regular intervals along my path. Whether it was the symbol, the daylight, or simply luck, I saw no sign of the wendigo or its kin as I made my way down the mountain. It took me 2 days of hard hiking, but eventually I reached a ranger station near the town of Newcomb. The rangers were surprised to see me. Apparently, I had wandered into a restricted area of the park, one that had been closed to hikers for years due to dangerous conditions. They assumed I had simply gotten lost and crossed the boundary markers by accident. I didn't tell them the truth. How could I? They would have thought me mad, suffering from exposure or dehydration, or simply the stress of being lost in the wilderness. So I nodded and agreed and let them drive me back to civilization, to hot showers and proper meals and the comforting hum of human activity. But Thomas was right about one thing. Part of me remained in those mountains. I dream of them almost every night. In the dreams, I'm running through endless trees, always pursued, never escaping. Sometimes I wake up to find dirt under my fingernails, pine needles in my bed, as if I've been wandering in my sleep. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror in the early hours of the morning, before the sun has fully risen, I think I see a change in my face, a subtle elongation, a paleness that goes beyond mere lack of sun, a mouth that seems just slightly wrong. I've moved since then, left New York entirely. I live in Arizona now, surrounded by desert and open sky, as far from dense forests and mountains as I can get. But distance doesn't matter. In my heart, I know the truth. The mountain has claimed me, just as it claimed Thomas Davis and who knows how many others before him. And someday, whether in a year or 10 or 50, it will call me back. And when it does, I will go. Because that's what happens when you become part of the wilderness. You can leave, but it never truly leaves you. My name is Anthony Wilson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, where I had decided to spend a week hiking along the less traveled paths of the High Peaks Wilderness area near Black Pond. I needed time away from everything: the crushing deadlines at the architectural firm where I worked, the painful aftermath of my divorce, and especially the nightmares that had plagued me since witnessing my brother's drowning accident when I was 12. I'd always been an avid hiker but rarely ventured out alone. Something about this trip felt necessary, though, like I needed to prove something to myself. I'd mapped out a challenging route that would take me through some of the most isolated sections of the park, areas where cell service disappeared and rangers only patrolled occasionally. The solitude appealed to me, or at least I thought it did. The first 2 days went perfectly. The late September weather held steady, cool mornings giving way to comfortably warm afternoons. The fall colors were just beginning to emerge, painting the landscape in subtle hues of gold and crimson. I followed the Northville Placid Trail before breaking off onto lesser-known paths, using my topographical maps and compass to navigate. I deliberately left my GPS at home, wanting to disconnect completely. On the third morning, I woke to a heavy mist clinging to the ground. It swirled around my tent like ghostly fingers, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. I packed up slowly, sipping my coffee and waiting for the sun to burn through, but the fog only seemed to thicken. Still, I wasn't concerned. I'd studied my route carefully and felt confident in my navigation skills. By midday, the mist had transformed into a light but persistent drizzle. The temperature dropped and the wind picked up, sending eerie whistles through the trees. According to my map, I was approaching Black Pond, an isolated body of water known for its unusually dark waters. Local legends claimed the pond had no bottom, though I knew that was scientifically absurd. The rain intensified as I made my way down a slippery slope toward the pond's shoreline. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. I found a relatively dry spot under a dense canopy of pines and decided to set up camp early. No point in risking a dangerous slip on the wet rocks. As I secured my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The forest had grown unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, nothing but the steady patter of rain and the occasional groan of trees bending in the wind. I blamed my unease on exhaustion and hunger. After eating a quick meal of dehydrated stew, I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the rain intensify against the tent fabric. Despite my fatigue, sleep eluded me. Every sound seemed amplified. The drip of water from the tree branches, the distant hoot of an owl, and something else. Something that sounded almost like whispers. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I jolted awake to absolute darkness. My watch read 3:17 a.m. The rain had stopped, but something had woken me. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There it was again, a splashing sound coming from the direction of the pond, as if something large was moving through the water. Curiosity overcame my better judgment. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly, wincing at the noise. The night air hit me like a physical blow, unnaturally cold and carrying a putrid smell that reminded me of rotting vegetation and something worse, something animal and decaying. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the mist that now hovered over the pond's surface like a living thing. The water was as black as oil, reflecting nothing, not even the beam of my light. The splashing had stopped, but as I swept my flashlight across the shoreline, I caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape disappearing into the trees on the opposite bank. I told myself it was probably just a deer or perhaps a black bear, though something about its movement seemed wrong, too fluid, too deliberate. I retreated to my tent, zipping it securely, knowing full well how flimsy a barrier it truly was. Sleep was impossible now. I lay awake, listening intently, jumping at every sound. Dawn arrived with merciful slowness. The fog had lifted somewhat, though low clouds still obscured the sun. I emerged from my tent, stiff and exhausted. The events of the night seemed less threatening in the gray morning light. I made coffee on my small stove, trying to shake off my unease. That's when I noticed the tracks. They circled my tent, deeply pressed into the soft earth, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Too large for a deer, too strange for a bear. The impressions were roughly foot-shaped but elongated and ended in what appeared to be sharp points, as if whatever made them had claws or talons. And they didn't approach from the forest. They emerged from the direction of the pond. My hands shook as I hastily packed my gear. The rational part of my mind tried to find explanations. Perhaps someone was playing a prank, or maybe I was seeing natural depressions made by rainwater and my tired mind was connecting them into a pattern. But I couldn't convince myself. Those tracks had not been there the evening before. I shouldered my pack and consulted my map. The nearest ranger station was at Lake Placid, about 15 miles northwest. If I pushed hard, I could make it by nightfall. I set off at a brisk pace, constantly checking behind me, unable to shake the sensation of being watched. The day grew increasingly strange. My compass began to behave erratically, the needle spinning wildly before settling in directions I knew couldn't be correct. The map seemed wrong too. Landmarks I should have encountered were missing, while unfamiliar formations appeared where nothing should be. The sun remained hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, making it impossible to navigate by its position. By mid-afternoon, I had to admit the horrible truth. I was lost. The trail I had been following had gradually disappeared, becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. The trees looked identical in every direction. Tall pines with trunks blackened by moisture, their branches hanging low like mourners at a funeral. My throat tightened with panic. I forced myself to stop, to breathe deeply, to think rationally. I found a small clearing and spread out my map, trying to retrace my steps and identify where I might have gone wrong. As I studied the contour lines, a drop of water fell onto the paper, then another. I looked up, expecting rain, but the droplets were coming from a single branch directly above me, thick, dark drops that smelled of pond water and decay. I scrambled away, heart pounding as more drops began to fall from surrounding trees, each landing with an unnatural heaviness. The forest floor became dotted with small, dark puddles that seemed to glisten with an oily sheen. I shoved my map into my pocket and ran blindly, no longer caring about direction, only wanting to escape the strange rainfall. I don't know how long I ran before tripping on an exposed root, landing hard on my hands and knees. Pain shot through my wrist and I bit back a cry. As I caught my breath, I realized the unnatural rain had stopped. In fact, all sound had stopped. The forest was wrapped in a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. That silence was broken by a voice. "Are you hurt?" I whirled around to see a man standing a few yards away. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in worn hiking gear that looked at least a decade out of style. His face was deeply lined, weather-beaten, with eyes so pale they appeared almost colorless. I'm fine, I managed, getting to my feet while keeping my distance. Just took a fall. The man nodded slowly. Easy to get hurt out here. Easy to get lost, too. His voice had a strange quality to it, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I'm a bit turned around, I admitted, trying to make it to Lake Placid. Lake Placid? He shook his head. "You're heading the wrong way. You're closer to Black Pond now than when you started this morning." My blood ran cold. How did he know where I'd camped? I hadn't seen another soul since entering this section of the park. "I'm Elias Marsh," he said, extending his hand. "Local guide, live just beyond the northern edge of the park. I know these woods better than most." I hesitated before shaking his hand briefly. His skin was ice cold and slightly damp. "Anthony Wilson," I replied, then immediately regretted giving my real name. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Anthony." Elias's pale eyes never blinked. "Not near Black Pond. Especially not now." "Why, especially not now?" "It's hungry this time of year, before the long winter sleep." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air. "What's hungry?" Elias just stared at me, his expression unchanging. "You need to leave. I can show you the way out." Every instinct told me not to trust this strange man, but I was genuinely lost, and the thought of spending another night near that pond terrified me more than following him. "Lead the way," I said finally. Elias turned without another word and began walking at a brisk pace. I followed, keeping a careful distance between us. He moved with surprising agility for a man who appeared to be in his 60s, navigating the difficult terrain without hesitation. We walked in silence for nearly an hour, the forest growing darker as the day waned. "So, you're a guide?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Do you take many groups through this area?" "Not anymore," Elias replied without turning, "and never near Black Pond." "What is it about that pond that concerns you?" I pressed, remembering the tracks around my tent, the strange rainfall, the splashing in the night. Elias stopped suddenly, turning to face me. "The old-timers called it a wendigo pond." "A wendigo? Like the creature from Native American folklore?" "Call it what you want. The Algonquin people avoided this area entirely. The early settlers lost livestock whenever they ventured too close. Later, hikers went missing. The rangers attribute the disappearances to exposure, accidents, bear attacks. Easier than admitting the truth. Which is, some places are doorways, and doors open both ways. His pale eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. It's been getting stronger lately, more active, taking more. I was about to dismiss his words as local superstition when a sound cut through the forest. A long, mournful wail that was neither human nor animal. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the trees and into my bones. Elias didn't react as if he hadn't heard it, but I saw his nostrils flare, and he tilted his head slightly like a predator catching a scent. "We need to hurry," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "It's following us." "What is?" I demanded, but he was already moving again, faster now, ducking under branches and weaving between trees with inhuman grace. I struggled to keep up, my pack suddenly feeling twice as heavy. The sky darkened rapidly, not just with the approach of evening, but with storm clouds that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The temperature plummeted, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Another wail echoed through the forest. Closer this time. I could have sworn I heard my name within its undulating tones. "Elias," I called out, realizing he'd gotten too far ahead. "Wait." He stopped and turned, his face now half hidden in shadow. "It's calling to you. Don't listen." "I don't hear anything," I lied, not wanting to admit the truth, that the wailing sound was becoming more articulate, more seductive, promising rest and warmth if only I would stop running and wait for it. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. But these weren't the strange, oily droplets from earlier, just normal cold rain that quickly soaked through my jacket. "There's a cabin ahead," Elias shouted over the growing storm. "We can shelter there." I followed him up a steep incline, my boots slipping on the wet ground. At the top of the ridge stood a small log cabin, its windows dark, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the stone chimney. It looked ancient and somehow wrong, as if it had been built according to proportions that were slightly off. Elias pushed open the door without knocking and gestured for me to enter. I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly reluctant. "It's this, or the storm," Elias said impatiently, "and what's in the storm is far worse than anything in here." As if to emphasize his point, that terrible wailing sound came again, so close it seemed to be just behind me. I stumbled into the cabin. The interior was Spartan, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a small wood stove in the corner, and a narrow bed against the far wall. A kerosene lamp hung from a ceiling beam, unlit. The air smelled of smoke, earth, and something else I couldn't identify, something old and vaguely medicinal. Elias secured the door behind us, sliding a heavy wooden bar into place. He moved to the wood stove, opening its door to reveal glowing embers, which he fed with small pieces of kindling until flames licked upward. "Take off your wet things," he instructed, lighting the kerosene lamp. The yellow light cast long shadows across the cabin's interior, revealing shelves lined with glass jars containing unidentifiable substances, some liquid, some solid, all unsettling. I removed my soaked jacket and hung it near the stove, but kept the rest of my clothes on despite their dampness. I wasn't about to make myself vulnerable in this strange place with this even stranger man. "You said something's following us," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my fear. "What exactly do you think is out there?" Elias busied himself with something at the small counter beside the stove. "You saw the tracks around your tent, didn't you?" he asked without turning. "You heard it in the water." I swallowed hard. It could have been anything. A bear, perhaps? "No bear leaves tracks like that." He turned to face me, holding 2 tin cups. "And no bear speaks your name in the wind." He handed me one of the cups. It contained a dark liquid that smelled strongly of herbs and something metallic. "Drink," he said. "It will help ward it off." I looked at the brew skeptically. "What is it?" "Protection. Old knowledge." His pale eyes fixed on mine. "The kind passed down by those who survived encounters." I set the cup on the table untouched. "I think I'll pass." Elias's expression hardened. "Your choice, but its influence grows stronger as night falls. I can already feel it pulling at you." Outside, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the cabin's small windows, and wind howled through the surrounding trees. Or was it the wind? That mournful wailing seemed to persist beneath the storm's natural sounds, forming patterns that almost resembled words. "How do you know so much about this thing?" I asked, trying to distract myself from the sounds outside. Elias took a long drink from his cup before answering. "My grandfather was the first to understand what lived in Black Pond. He found journals from the original settlers, records of what happened to those who stayed too close to the water for too long." He set his cup down and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in strange, spiraling scars, pale lines etched deep into his flesh. "He taught my father, who taught me, how to recognize the signs, how to protect ourselves." "And what exactly are you protecting yourself from?" The old Algonquin called it the devourer of dreams. It feeds on hope first, then fear, then flesh. He traced one of the scars with his fingertip. It gets inside your head, makes you see things, makes you doubt. The longer you're exposed, the stronger its hold. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making me jump. The kerosene lamp flickered, the flame dancing wildly before stabilizing. "You think I'm crazy," Elias said, his voice suddenly gentle. "That's fine. Skepticism is healthy. But answer me this. How did you get so turned around today? How did you end up closer to the pond despite walking away from it all day?" I had no answer for that. "And the whispers you heard last night," he continued. "The ones that sounded almost like your name. The splashing in the water that drew you out of your tent. The feeling of being watched." My mouth went dry. I hadn't told him any of those details. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "Because it always begins the same way." Elias's eyes reflected the lamplight strangely. It calls to you, it confuses you, it isolates you, and then... A tremendous crash interrupted him as something heavy slammed against the cabin door. The wooden bar securing it creaked, but held. Elias didn't seem surprised. He calmly reached above the fireplace and took down an ancient-looking rifle. "It's never been this bold before," he said, checking the weapon's loading mechanism. "Must be very hungry indeed." Another impact shook the door, and this time I heard splintering wood. Whatever was out there, it was getting in. "What do we do?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "We can't run." "Not in this storm, not in the dark." Elias handed me a wicked-looking hunting knife from his belt. "If it gets in, aim for the eyes. It's the only vulnerable spot." The pounding against the door became rhythmic, deliberate. With each impact, the wooden bar bent further, splinters flying from the frame. The whole cabin seemed to shudder. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. Elias remained perfectly still, rifle aimed at the door, barely breathing. I gripped the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. A new sound emerged, a soft, gentle tapping on one of the windows, like someone politely requesting entry. Against my better judgment, I turned to look. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw a face, my brother's face, exactly as it had looked the day he drowned. Water streaming from his hair, his lips blue, his eyes wide and pleading. He mouthed my name, pressing a pale hand against the window. "Don't look at it," Elias hissed. "It's not your brother. It's showing you what you fear most." I tore my gaze away, but my brother's voice, a voice I hadn't heard in 22 years, called to me from outside. "Anthony, please. I'm cold. Let me in. I've been looking for you for so long." "Stop," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's not real," Elias insisted. "Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, it's not real." But it sounded so real, so achingly, perfectly real. My brother's voice tinged with the same slight stutter he'd had in life. "Anthony, why did you let me drown? Why didn't you save me? The least you can do is let me in now." Tears burned behind my closed eyelids. The rational part of my mind knew this couldn't be happening, yet the guilt I'd carried for decades surged to the surface, overwhelming my reason. I felt movement beside me and opened my eyes to see Elias pressing something into my hand, a small pouch made of worn leather. "Put this around your neck," he commanded. "Now." My fingers fumbled with the thin cord attached to the pouch. The tapping at the window grew more insistent, my brother's voice more desperate. "Anthony, please. It hurts out here. The water fills my lungs every night. I just want it to stop." I finally managed to slip the cord over my head. The moment the pouch touched my chest, my brother's voice changed, warped and deepened into something inhuman, filled with rage rather than pleading. "Give him to me!" The thing outside roared, all pretense abandoned. The window shattered inward, showering us with glass as a limb, too long, too thin to be human, reached through the opening. It ended not in a hand, but in something like elongated fingers tipped with translucent claws, dripping with black pond water. Elias fired the rifle. The report was deafening in the small cabin. The limb recoiled but didn't retreat. Instead, more appendages pushed through the broken window, grasping at the frame, pulling. Something was climbing in. I caught glimpses of it in the flickering lamplight. A body like a human's but wrong, the proportions distorted, the skin a sickly grayish-white mottled with black. Its face retained elements of my brother's features but stretched and warped, the mouth far too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. The eyes, though, the eyes were still recognizably his, and they fixed on me with terrible longing. "The eyes!" Elias shouted, reloading the rifle with practiced speed. "Strike the eyes!" The creature lunged across the cabin with impossible speed. I raised the knife instinctively, but it wasn't aiming for me. It went straight for Elias, wrapping those elongated limbs around him. The rifle discharged again, the bullet going wild as man and monster crashed into the shelves, sending the glass jars shattering to the floor. I stood frozen, knife in hand, watching as Elias struggled against the thing that wore a twisted version of my brother's face. They rolled across the floor, knocking over the table, upsetting the wood stove so that burning logs spilled onto the wooden planks. The creature's strength was terrifying. It pinned Elias to the ground, that too wide mouth opening impossibly wider, unhinging like a snake's jaw. Elias managed to get one arm free and drove his thumb into one of the creature's eyes. It reared back, emitting a shriek that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. That's when I finally found my courage. I lunged forward, driving the hunting knife into its other eye. The blade sank deep, and the creature convulsed, releasing Elias to claw at its ruined face. Its shrieks became deafening, and its form began to change, its limbs shortening and thickening, its skin darkening to a more human tone. To my horror, it looked more and more like my brother with each passing second, not the twisted, monstrous version, but as he had been in life. A terrified 12-year-old boy with my knife buried in his eye socket. "Don't stop!" Elias shouted, struggling to his feet. "It's trying to make you hesitate." The thing that was becoming my brother reached for me, its remaining eye filled with confused betrayal. "Why, Anthony?" it asked in a perfect imitation of his childish voice. "It hurts." I stumbled backward, unable to strike again. The transformation continued, the wounds we'd inflicted seeming to heal, the monstrous aspects receding further. Elias saw my hesitation and acted. He grabbed a jar that had somehow remained intact during the struggle, yanked out the cork with his teeth and flung the contents at the creature. The powder inside ignited upon contact with the air, engulfing the thing in blue-white flames that clung to its skin like napalm. The illusion of my brother vanished instantly. What burned before us was nothing human, a writhing mass of elongated limbs and raw, glistening flesh that had never seen sunlight. Its screams changed pitch, becoming a low, rattling hiss that made my teeth ache. "Run!" Elias shouted, grabbing my arm. "The whole place is going up." I suddenly realized that the spilled embers from the wood stove had ignited the floor. Flames were spreading rapidly across the dry wooden planks, feeding on whatever substances had leaked from the broken jars. We burst out into the storm, the cold rain a shock after the burning cabin. Behind us, the creature's inhuman screams continued as the fire consumed both it and the structure. I wanted to keep running, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that burning cabin, but Elias held me in place. "We have to make sure," he insisted, rain streaming down his face, mixing with blood from a cut on his forehead. "We have to be certain it doesn't escape." So we watched as the cabin was devoured by flames that seemed too intense, too hungry for normal fire. The creature's screams eventually stopped, but we remained until the roof collapsed inward in a shower of sparks. Only then did Elias allow us to seek shelter beneath a rocky overhang 100 yards away. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us shivering with cold and shock. The storm gradually subsided, the rain reducing to a gentle patter. Through breaks in the clouds, stars became visible, normal, reassuring stars in familiar constellations. Was that really what lives in Black Pond? I finally asked. Elias shook his head slowly. "No, that was just a fragment, a small piece of it that was drawn to you. The real thing never leaves the water." "But why me? Why was it drawn to me specifically?" He looked at me with those unsettling, pale eyes. "It feeds on guilt, on trauma, on the wounds we carry inside." He nodded toward the leather pouch still hanging around my neck. "That protected you from its full influence, but you were already marked by the time I found you. It had already tasted your guilt about your brother." I touched the pouch gingerly. "What's in this?" "Various herbs, certain minerals, a few other things you're better off not knowing about." He grimaced as he shifted position, revealing a deep gash in his side that I hadn't noticed before. Family recipe. I moved to examine his wound, but he waved me away. "It's nothing. I've had worse. We need to get you to a doctor," I insisted, seeing how much blood had soaked through his shirt. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Nearest help is still miles away, and I doubt I'll make it that far. Besides, this isn't the kind of wound that doctors can fix." Looking closer, I could see that the edges of the gash had a strange, blackened appearance, and the veins surrounding it were dark and prominent, as if filled with ink rather than blood. "It's poison," I realized aloud. Elias nodded. "The Devourer's touch corrupts. Always has." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn journal. "Take this. It contains everything my family learned about the thing in Black Pond. How to avoid it. How to protect yourself if you can't avoid it." "I can't just leave you here," I protested. "You must." His voice was firm. "Dawn is coming. When the sun rises, follow it east. You'll find the main trail within a few hours. Don't look back. Don't come back." "But the thing in the pond isn't dead. What we faced was just an extension of it, like a finger or a tendril. The main body remains in the depths." He pressed the journal into my hands. "Others need to know. The Park Service, the local authorities, they dismiss the disappearances, attribute them to natural causes. Meanwhile, it grows stronger, takes more victims." I reluctantly took the journal, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. "I'll make sure people know the truth." Elias smiled faintly. "No one will believe you. They'll say you had a bad fall, suffered exposure, hallucinated the whole thing." He gestured to the journal. "But the knowledge is there for those who need it, for the next person who feels drawn to Black Pond." We fell silent again. I watched as Elias's breathing became more labored, the black veins spreading visibly up his neck toward his face. He didn't complain, didn't show fear, just a quiet acceptance that was somehow more terrifying than panic would have been. As the first pale light of dawn broke through the trees, Elias spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I'm gone, burn my body. Don't let it take me. I fought it too long to become part of it now." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. This strange man had saved my life, had known exactly what we were facing and how to fight it, and now he was dying because of it. "One last thing," he said, reaching up to remove something from around his neck, a carved stone pendant on a leather cord. "This has protected my family for generations. Take it." "I can't." "You must." His pale eyes, now clouded with pain, fixed on mine. "It's been waiting for someone like you, someone who could understand, someone who could continue the fight." I accepted the pendant reluctantly. It was warm to the touch despite the cold air, the stone carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Elias died as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, slipping away so quietly I almost didn't notice the moment of his passing. I did as he asked, gathered wood, built a pyre, and committed his body to the flames. I watched until nothing remained but ashes, which I scattered across the forest floor. Then I followed the rising sun eastward, just as he had instructed. By midday, I found the main trail, and by evening, I had reached the ranger station at Lake Placid. I told them a sanitized version of what had happened, that I'd gotten lost, been caught in the storm, and taken shelter in an abandoned cabin that had caught fire. I mentioned meeting a local guide named Elias Marsh who had helped me but had been injured and died from his wounds. The rangers exchanged glances when I mentioned the name. "There's no guide by that name in these parts," one of them told me. "Not for at least 40 years. He showed me a faded photograph on the station wall, a group portrait of rangers and local guides from 1983. And there, standing at the edge of the group, was a younger version of Elias, looking exactly as he had when I met him, right down to the stone pendant around his neck. I left the ranger station with more questions than answers. In the weeks that followed, I pored over Elias's journal, trying to make sense of what had happened at Black Pond. The journal contained detailed accounts spanning over a century, all written in the same handwriting, all signed by Elias Marsh. According to these accounts, the thing in Black Pond had been there since before European settlement. The Algonquin had placed stones around the water's edge to contain it, performed rituals to keep it dormant. When settlers arrived and removed the stones for building materials, it awakened, and Elias, or whatever Elias truly was, had appointed himself its jailer, its opponent, for far longer than any human lifespan should allow. I've never returned to the Adirondacks. I've never told the full story to anyone until now, but I keep Elias's pendant around my neck, and sometimes in my dreams, I hear the whispers again, calling me back to Black Pond, promising answers, promising reunion with those I've lost, and sometimes I find myself considering the journey. After all, I have Elias's journal now. I know the protections, the weaknesses of the thing in the pond. Maybe I could finish what he started. Maybe I could end it once and for all, or maybe that's exactly what it wants me to think. Either way, I know one thing with absolute certainty. There are dark places in this world where ancient, hungry things dwell, places where the boundary between our reality and something else grows thin, and Black Pond is one of them. If you're planning a hiking trip in the Adirondacks, do yourself a favor, stay away from Black Pond. No matter how beautiful it looks on the map, no matter how drawn to it you feel, some waters are better left undisturbed. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in New York, a place that still haunts my dreams and waking moments alike. 3 months ago, my girlfriend Stephanie Nguyen and I decided we needed to escape the suffocating rhythm of city life. We'd been dating for 2 years, and lately things had grown tense between us. Small disagreements escalated into heated arguments, often ending with one of us sleeping on the couch. This camping trip was supposed to be our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Stephanie worked as an emergency room nurse, her high-stress job often leaving her drained and irritable. I was a software developer who had recently been laid off, adding financial strain to our relationship. The trip was my idea, a way to show Stephanie I could still contribute something valuable to our lives together. It'll be romantic, I insisted, showing her photos of pristine lakes and dense forests. Just us, nature, and no distractions. Stephanie wasn't convinced at first. She preferred vacations with amenities like hot showers and comfortable beds, but eventually she relented. Fine, but if I get eaten by a bear, I'm coming back to haunt you, she joked. I spent weeks planning our 5-day trek through the High Peaks Wilderness area near Lake Placid. I mapped our route carefully, plotting stops at scenic overlooks and secluded campsites. I even splurged on new hiking gear despite our tight budget, determined to make this trip perfect. We arrived at the trailhead on a crisp Friday morning in early October. The autumn colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds painting the landscape in fiery hues. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most tourists had already packed up for the season. "It's beautiful," Stephanie admitted as we shouldered our packs. Her long, black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her almond-shaped eyes scanning the tree line. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe we could find our way back to each other in these ancient mountains. The first day's hike was invigorating. 8 miles of moderate trails took us deep into the wilderness, far from cell service and other hikers. We talked more than we had in months, swapping stories and reminiscing about our early dating days. By the time we reached our first campsite, a small clearing near Avalanche Lake, we were both smiling genuinely. I set up our tent while Stephanie collected firewood. As dusk settled, we sat close together by the crackling fire, sharing a bottle of wine I'd packed as a surprise. Stars emerged overhead, impossibly bright against the dark canvas of the sky. "Thank you for convincing me to come," Stephanie said, resting her head on my shoulder. I needed this more than I realized. We fell asleep in each other's arms that night, the sound of gentle waves lapping at the lakeshore lulling us into a deep slumber. Everything felt right again, our urban problems distant and insignificant in this wild place. Then came the whispers. I woke suddenly, disoriented in the pitch-black tent. The digital watch on my wrist showed 3:17 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through leaves, but as my senses sharpened, I recognized it as something else, something that made my skin prickle with unease. Voices. Multiple voices, murmuring just outside our tent, too soft to make out words but distinctly human in their cadence. "Steph," I whispered, gently shaking her. "Wake up." She stirred reluctantly. "What's wrong?" "Listen." Her body tensed as she registered the sounds. The whispers continued, circling our tent slowly, methodically. There seemed to be 3 or 4 distinct voices, though none spoke loud enough for us to understand what they were saying. "Who's out there?" I called, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in my voice. The whispers ceased immediately. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the voices had been. "Maybe it's other hikers?" Stephanie suggested, though her tight grip on my arm betrayed her fear. "At this hour? This far from the trail?" I reached for the flashlight beside our sleeping bags. "I'm going to check." "Don't," she pleaded, but I was already unzipping the tent. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating our small campsite. Nothing moved among the trees. The fire had died to embers hours ago. Even the night creatures were silent. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing slightly against the rocky shoreline. No response came, but as I swept the flashlight around our perimeter, something caught my eye. At the edge of our camp, where the light from our fire would have ended, stood a small cairn of rocks, a stack balanced precisely one atop another, forming a small tower about 2 feet high. "That wasn't there earlier," Stephanie said, now standing beside me in her thermal pajamas, hugging herself against the cold night air. She was right. We'd set up camp in daylight, and I would have noticed a rock formation like that. Someone had been here while we slept, before the whispers started. "Let's go back inside," I suggested, suddenly aware of how exposed we were. "It's probably nothing. Maybe some hikers passed through and decided to mess with us." We retreated to our tent, but sleep evaded us. We lay awake until dawn broke, listening intently for any sound beyond the natural ambience of the forest. The whispers didn't return, but neither did our sense of security. When morning came fully, I emerged to find the cairn gone. No trace of the rock tower remained. If not for Stephanie having seen it too, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined it entirely. "We should head back," Stephanie said as she boiled water for our instant coffee. "I don't like this." Part of me agreed with her, but a larger part felt a stubborn determination not to let one strange incident ruin our trip. It was probably just some local kids playing pranks on tourists, I reasoned. We're already out here. Let's stick to the plan. After some persuasion, Stephanie reluctantly agreed to continue. Our second day's hike would take us to the summit of Mount Marcy, New York's highest peak. The challenging terrain and breathtaking views would surely take our minds off the previous night's disturbance. The trail grew steeper as we ascended. Twisted roots and jagged rocks turned each step into a careful negotiation. Despite the physical exertion, I felt uneasy, constantly scanning our surroundings. Several times I thought I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, only to find nothing when I turned to look. By midday, a fog had rolled in, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. The temperature dropped noticeably, and an unseasonable dampness permeated our clothes despite our waterproof gear. "I don't like this weather," Stephanie said, her breath forming small clouds. The forecast didn't mention fog. She was right. I'd checked obsessively before our trip, and clear skies had been predicted all week. Yet here we were, enveloped in a gray mist that seemed to swallow sound as well as sight. "Let's keep going," I urged. "We're more than halfway to the summit. We can set up camp in that protected area I marked on the map." As we pushed forward, the fog thickened until I could barely see Stephanie walking a few feet ahead of me. The trail markers became our lifeline, the only way to ensure we stayed on the correct path. Time seemed to stretch and distort in the disorienting haze. "Michael?" Stephanie called, her voice sounding oddly distant despite her proximity. "Do you hear that?" I stopped, listening intently. At first, all I could hear was our labored breathing and the dull thud of my heartbeat. Then it came, a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter, children's laughter, high and musical, echoing through the fog somewhere ahead of us. "Hello," I shouted. "Is someone there?" The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by those same whispers from the night before, but this time they were closer, more distinct. Still, I couldn't make out words, just the unsettling cadence of multiple voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "We need to get to the campsite now," I said, grabbing Stephanie's hand. Her fingers were ice cold in mine. "Stay close." We moved faster, stumbling over hidden obstacles in our haste. The whispers seemed to follow us, sometimes drifting from the left, sometimes from the right. Occasionally, a child's giggle would pierce through, causing us both to flinch. After what felt like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, we reached the small plateau where I'd planned for us to camp. The fog was slightly thinner here, allowing us to see perhaps 20 feet in any direction. Without discussing it, we worked together to set up our tent, hands shaking with cold and fear. As I hammered in the last stake, a gust of wind momentarily thinned the fog, revealing a startling sight about 15 yards away, another cairn of rocks identical to the one we'd seen the previous night. "Michael," Stephanie whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Look." I followed her gaze. In the brief clearing of fog, I could make out more cairns, dozens of them, arranged in a perfect circle around our campsite. Before I could react, the fog closed in again, obscuring everything beyond our immediate vicinity. But now that I knew what surrounded us, each shadow, each darker patch of gray mist seemed menacing. We retreated to our tent, zipping it closed as if the thin nylon could protect us from whatever lurked beyond. We spoke in whispers, debating our options. "We need to leave first thing tomorrow," Stephanie insisted. "Forget the summit. This isn't right." I nodded, my earlier stubbornness completely evaporated. "We'll head straight back to the car. If we start at dawn and move quickly, we can make it by late afternoon." We ate a cold dinner inside the tent, neither of us willing to venture out to cook on our portable stove. As night fully descended, the temperature plummeted further. We huddled together in our sleeping bags, straining to hear any sound above the whistling wind. Sleep came in fitful bursts for me, each time jolting awake at the slightest noise. Stephanie fared worse, her body rigid with tension beside mine. Around midnight, the whispers returned. They were different this time, more insistent, seeming to come from directly outside the thin walls of our tent, and for the first time I could make out fragments of words. "Not welcome here. Should never have come. Make them understand." I gripped the handle of my hunting knife, though I knew it would offer little protection against whatever was out there. Beside me, Stephanie had buried her face in her sleeping bag, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then a new sound cut through the night, a rhythmic tapping against the outside of our tent. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. It moved around us, circling once, twice, 3 times. When it stopped, an unnatural silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came a child's voice, crystal clear and unnervingly close. "Come, play with us, strangers. We've been so lonely." Stephanie's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing so tight it hurt. Neither of us dared to speak or move. "We know you're awake," the voice continued, its sweetness at odds with the menace I felt radiating through the tent wall. It's rude to ignore an invitation. What happened next defies logical explanation. The entire tent began to shake violently, as if caught in a hurricane-force wind, yet the air inside remained still. Our belongings rattled and tumbled around us. The flashlight switched on by itself, flickering madly before dying completely, plunging us back into darkness. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. "Michael," Stephanie whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's someone in here with us." I couldn't see anything in the absolute darkness, but I felt it too. A presence, a weight to the air that hadn't been there before. The temperature inside the tent seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. My breath fogged in front of my face, visible now because of a faint greenish glow that had no source I could identify. In that sickly light, I saw a small shape huddled at the foot of our sleeping bags. It had the outline of a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, but there was something profoundly wrong about its proportions. Limbs too long and jointed in unnatural places, head cocked at an impossible angle. "Hello, Michael," it said, using the same childlike voice we'd heard outside. "Hello, Stephanie. We've been waiting for you to visit us." Stephanie's scream tore through the night, giving voice to the terror that had frozen me in place. I fumbled for the knife I'd dropped, but in the green glow, I could see it had somehow moved to the far corner of the tent, well out of reach. The child thing made a sound like giggling, but it reminded me more of bones breaking. "Don't be scared. We just want to play. It's been so long since anyone came to play with us." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my mouth so dry the words came out as a croak. "We are the forgotten," it replied. "The lost, the abandoned, the ones who never left these mountains." As it spoke, the green glow intensified, illuminating its face, or what should have been a face. Instead of features, there was only smooth, pale skin stretched taut over a skull-like shape, with 3 vertical slits where eyes and mouth should be. Stephanie had stopped screaming and was now making small, whimpering sounds beside me. I tried to think rationally, to find some explanation or solution, but my mind kept circling back to one primal instinct: run. The creature seemed to sense my thoughts. "You can't leave," it said, the slits on its face widening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. "No one leaves until they play the game." "What game?" I asked, trying to buy time while I inched my hand toward the tent zipper. The thing's head rotated a full 180 degrees, its body remaining perfectly still. "Hide and seek, but we hide, and you seek, and if you don't find us by dawn—" It paused, tilting its head back to face us with a sickening crack. "Well, then we get to keep you." Behind it, the tent zipper began to open on its own, revealing the fog-shrouded night outside. The whispers had returned louder now, a chorus of inhuman voices chanting words in a language I didn't recognize. "You have until the sun rises," the creature said, beginning to fade into the green light. "Find all 7 of us, and we'll let you go. Fail, and you'll join our game forever." With those words, it vanished completely, leaving behind only a lingering cold spot and the smell of damp earth and decay. Stephanie and I sat frozen for several minutes, neither daring to move. Finally, she broke the silence. "We're not really going to play their game, are we?" Her voice was small, fragile. I reached for her hand in the darkness. "No, we're getting out of here. Now." We grabbed only the essentials: water, some food, my knife, and a spare flashlight. The main trail was our best bet for a quick descent, even in the dark. If we moved fast enough, we might reach the ranger station before dawn. As we emerged from the tent, the fog parted momentarily, revealing the rock cairns still encircling our campsite. But now, each one was topped with a small object that gleamed dully in the weak moonlight, what looked disturbingly like human teeth. "Don't look at them," I said, pulling Stephanie toward where the trail should be. "Just keep moving." We stumbled through the darkness, the spare flashlight providing barely enough illumination to avoid tripping. The fog seemed to have a mind of its own, thickening just enough to obscure our path when we most needed clarity, then thinning to reveal glimpses of surrounding trees that looked nothing like the ones we'd passed on our ascent. The whispers accompanied us, sometimes fading to near inaudibility, other times swelling until they seemed to come from directly beside us. Occasionally, I caught fragments of English among the unknown language, taunts, threats, promises of what awaited us if we failed to find all 7 entities before dawn. "I don't think we're on the trail anymore," Stephanie said after we'd been walking for what felt like hours. Her voice was strained but calmer now, shock giving way to a sort of determined resignation. She was right. The ground beneath our feet had become rocky and uneven, climbing upward rather than descending as it should have if we were heading back to the trailhead. In the distance, I could make out the silhouette of a jagged peak against the night sky, a peak that shouldn't have been visible from our location. "They're leading us in circles," I realized aloud, or worse, deeper into the wilderness. As if in response to my words, childish laughter erupted from all directions, echoing off unseen rock faces. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving us in complete darkness. In the distance, a green glow appeared, the same sickly light that had illuminated the creature in our tent. It bobbed gently, as if carried by someone walking. "Is that one of them?" Stephanie whispered. "Should we try to catch it?" The thought of voluntarily approaching one of those things made my stomach churn, but what choice did we have? The sky had begun to lighten almost imperceptibly in the east. Dawn would come within hours. "Stay close to me," I said, gripping my knife tightly as we moved toward the light. As we drew closer, the green glow revealed itself to be emanating from a lantern of sorts, held by what appeared to be a normal human child, a little girl in an old-fashioned dress, her back to us as she walked slowly through the trees. "Hello," I called cautiously. "We're looking for you, for the game." The girl stopped but didn't turn around. "You found one," she said in a sing-song voice. "6 more to go." She began to turn, slowly, revealing her profile, a perfectly ordinary child's face with one wide, innocent eye that reflected the green light. "What's your name?" Stephanie asked, her medical training perhaps prompting her to try connecting with what looked like a lost child. "I'm Eliza," the girl replied. "I got lost here in 1879. My papa was a logger. He never found me." Her face continued its rotation, past the point where her neck should have allowed it to turn. As her face came fully into view, we saw that the normalcy of her profile was an illusion. The other half of her face was desiccated, skeletal, with a hollow socket where her eye should have been. Maggots writhed in the exposed flesh. Stephanie stumbled backward with a cry of horror. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "We found you, Eliza," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "That's one. Where are the others?" Eliza's half-mouth curved into a smile. "Clever, but finding is not the same as catching." With that, she darted away into the fog with unnatural speed. Without thinking, I lunged after her, managing to grasp the tattered edge of her dress. It felt wrong in my hand, not like fabric, but like cold, damp paper that disintegrated at my touch. Eliza screamed, a sound so high-pitched and inhuman that I released her instantly, covering my ears in pain. The scream continued for several seconds after she had vanished from sight, echoing through the mountains before fading into that same eerie whisper. "Michael!" Stephanie called from behind me. "Your hand!" I looked down to see that where I had touched Eliza's dress, my fingers were now covered in a black, tar-like substance that seemed to be slowly creeping up toward my wrist. It burned like acid, and no amount of wiping it against my pants would remove it. "What is this?" I gasped, the pain intensifying by the second. Stephanie, ever the nurse, quickly pulled a first aid kit from her jacket pocket and poured alcohol sanitizer over my hand. The black substance sizzled and smoked, but gradually began to dissolve, leaving angry red welts where it had touched my skin. "Don't touch them again," she said firmly. "We need to find another way to play this game." As if answering her, the green light appeared again. Not one light this time, but three, spaced about 20 yards apart. They hovered at different heights, pulsing gently like heartbeats. "Three more," I murmured. "But how do we catch them without touching them?" Stephanie's eyes widened suddenly. "The cairns. They're markers. I think we need to build cairns where we find them." It made a strange kind of sense. I remembered how the rock stacks had appeared and disappeared during our journey, how they had surrounded our campsite. Maybe they were more than just warnings or territory markers. "Let's try it," I agreed, already gathering suitable stones from the ground around us. We approached the nearest green light carefully. As we drew closer, it revealed another childlike figure. This one a boy of perhaps 10, dressed in clothes that might have been fashionable in the early 1900s. Unlike Eliza, he made no pretense of humanity. His form flickered and distorted like an image on a damaged film reel. Limbs elongating and contracting, head swelling, then shrinking. "Jeremy lost his way in 1912, the boy said, referring to himself in the third person. "His father was hunting. Jeremy wanted to prove he was brave." The boy's face split into a too-wide grin. Jeremy wasn't brave enough in the end. Without responding, I began stacking rocks at the exact spot where he stood. The entity hissed in displeasure, its form becoming more erratic, but it seemed unable to move away from the place we'd found it. When I placed the final stone on top of the small cairn, the green light flared brilliantly, then extinguished. Jeremy was gone, but the stack of rocks remained, now emitting a faint bluish glow. "It worked," Stephanie breathed, relief evident in her voice. We repeated the process with the other two lights, each revealing another lost child with its own gruesome deformities and tragic story. Each disappeared when properly marked with a cairn, their green glow replaced by the steady blue illumination of the rocks. "That's 4, I said, checking my watch. The dial read 5:38 a.m. Dawn would break soon. We need to find 3 more. The sky had lightened enough that we could now see our surroundings without the flashlight. We were on a barren ridge I didn't recognize with steep drops on either side. In the valley below, the fog formed a solid blanket, concealing whatever lay beneath. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the first hints of pink from the approaching sunrise. "Listen," Stephanie said suddenly, grabbing my arm. The whispers had changed, taking on a frantic, angry quality. They no longer surrounded us but seemed to be coming from one specific direction, back the way we had come. We followed the sound, moving carefully along the narrow ridge. As we rounded a bend, we saw them, the final 3 entities, huddled together beside a massive boulder. Unlike the others, these 3 made no attempt to appear human. They were shadow-like, vaguely humanoid but with elongated limbs and torsos that seemed to melt into one another. "You weren't supposed to figure it out," one hissed, its voice like stones grating together. "The game isn't fair if you know the rules," another added, higher-pitched, almost whining. The third said nothing but fixed us with glowing green pinpricks where eyes should be. "We found you," I stated firmly, already gathering stones for the final cairns. "The game is over." "No," the first shadow shrieked. "You must seek each of us separately. Those are the rules." But it was too late. The shadows were clustered so closely together that a single cairn could mark all 3. As I placed stone upon stone, they writhed and twisted, their forms stretching as if trying to escape an invisible tether. When the final stone settled into place, the shadows gave one unified howl of rage and despair. The sound physically knocked us backward, sending us sprawling onto the rocky ground. The green light surrounding the entities flared to blinding intensity, then imploded with a thunderous crack that shook the entire ridge. When our vision cleared, all 7 cairns were glowing blue, forming a perfect circle. In the center, where the 3 shadows had been, stood a woman. Unlike the monstrous entities, she appeared completely human, middle-aged, dressed in hiking clothes that might have been current 20 years ago. Her expression was one of profound sadness and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice normal, earthly. "They've held me here for so long, forcing me to lead others astray." "Who are you?" Stephanie asked, slowly getting to her feet. "Marjorie Keller. I got separated from my hiking group in 1997. Got lost in fog just like you did." She gestured to the cairns. "They've been here for centuries, trapping lost souls, using them to lure more victims. 7 of us remained, bound to this place." "And now?" I asked, aware that the eastern sky was rapidly brightening. Marjorie smiled, already beginning to fade. "Now we can go. The circle is complete. The binding is broken." Her form grew increasingly transparent. "Follow the blue lights. They'll lead you back to the trail. Hurry before the sun fully rises." As she vanished completely, the 7 cairns pulsed once in unison. Then, one by one, they toppled, the stones rolling into a formation that pointed like an arrow down the ridge. We didn't need to be told twice. Gathering our remaining supplies, we followed the path indicated by the stones. True to Marjorie's word, after about 20 minutes of careful descent, we found ourselves back on the main trail. The familiar red markers, a welcome sight. The fog had lifted entirely now, revealing a perfect autumn morning. Birds sang in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. If not for the black residue still visible on my hand and our general disheveled appearance, it would have been easy to believe the night's horrors had been nothing but a shared nightmare. We hiked in silence for hours, pushing ourselves to reach the trailhead before nightfall. Neither of us wanted to spend another minute in those mountains than absolutely necessary. It was late afternoon when we finally emerged into the parking lot where we'd left our car just 2 days earlier, though it felt like weeks had passed. As we threw our packs into the trunk, Stephanie finally broke our long silence. "What do we tell people about this?" I considered the question as we climbed into the car. "Nothing," I finally decided. "Who would believe us?" She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I never want to see another hiking trail as long as I live." As we drove away from the Adirondacks, watching the mountains recede in our rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only glimpsed the edge of something ancient and terrible lurking in those remote peaks. Something that had been there long before humans arrived and would remain long after we were gone. Sometimes at night, I still hear those whispers at the edge of consciousness. And whenever I see a carefully balanced stack of rocks on a trail or riverbank, I give it a wide berth, remembering the eerie blue glow and the lost souls of the Adirondack high peaks. Stephanie and I stayed together after our ordeal, our shared experience creating a bond stronger than any disagreement could break. We moved away from New York entirely, settling in a bustling city where we're never more than a few minutes from other people. Neither of us has mentioned returning to the wilderness, and I suspect neither of us ever will. Some places are not meant for the living. Some games are not meant to be played. And some mountains keep their secrets buried deep within their ancient hearts, only revealing them to those unfortunate enough to wander off the marked path. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, near a place locals call Echo Mountain. I've always been a city girl at heart. Born and raised in Manhattan, my idea of roughing it was a weekend at a 3-star hotel. But when my best friend Megan suggested we take a hiking trip to reconnect with nature and clear our minds, I reluctantly agreed. We'd been friends since college, and after her painful divorce 6 months ago, I felt I owed her this one adventure. Besides, how bad could a weekend in the woods really be? We planned a 3-day hike along the lesser-traveled northern trail of Echo Mountain, an imposing peak in the Adirondack Range. The locals in the small town of Blackwater warned us against it, something about hikers going missing over the years, but we chalked it up to small-town superstition. Besides, Megan had researched the trail extensively and assured me it was perfectly safe, just less popular than the tourist-heavy southern routes. The drive from the city took longer than expected, and by the time we reached the trailhead parking lot, the late afternoon sun was already casting long shadows through the dense pines. The air smelled of earth and decay, a heady mixture that made my stomach turn slightly. City lungs, I suppose. "Ready for this?" Megan asked, her eyes bright with excitement as she shouldered her backpack. She'd always been the adventurous one, while I was more calculated and cautious. "As I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile. I triple-checked my pack: tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, water purification tablets, enough food for 4 days, just in case, and an extra battery pack for our phones. My anxiety always manifested in over-preparation. The first mile of the trail was deceptively pleasant. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze kept the mosquitoes at bay. Megan chatted excitedly about the wildlife we might see: deer, foxes, maybe even a black bear if we were lucky. I nodded along, hoping we wouldn't encounter anything larger than a squirrel. As we climbed higher, the trail narrowed and grew steeper. The forest thickened around us, the trees pressing closer, their branches intertwining overhead until only patches of sky remained visible. The bird songs gradually faded into an unsettling silence, broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. "It's getting dark," I noted, checking my watch. "Should we make camp soon?" Megan consulted her map. "There's a clearing about half a mile ahead. Perfect spot for the night." That half mile stretched endlessly. My legs burned with exertion and my pack seemed to gain weight with each step. Just when I was about to suggest we stop regardless of clearing or not, the trees parted, revealing a small meadow bathed in the dying light of sunset. "See? Perfect timing," Megan said triumphantly. We set up our tent with practiced efficiency, one of the few outdoor skills I possessed thanks to a mandatory camping trip in college. As darkness fell completely, we huddled around a small fire, roasting marshmallows and sipping from flasks of whiskey. "To new experiences," Megan toasted, her face golden in the firelight. "And to old friends," I added, clinking my metal cup against hers. The whiskey warmed my insides, and gradually the tension in my shoulders began to ease. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. The stars emerged overhead, countless pinpricks of light in a velvet sky. No light pollution here. The Milky Way spread across the heavens in a spectacular display I'd only seen in photographs. "It's beautiful," I whispered, not wanting to disturb the perfect stillness. Megan nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Worth the hike, right?" I had to admit it was. We sat in companionable silence, listening to the crackling fire and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with us, and we retreated to our tent, zipping ourselves into our respective sleeping bags. "Night, Jess," Megan murmured, already half asleep. "Good night," I replied, closing my eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. The ground was hard beneath me despite the sleeping pad, and every snapping twig or rustling leaf jolted me back to alertness. The forest seemed to come alive at night, full of mysterious sounds that my city-trained ears couldn't identify. Was that a fox? A raccoon? Something larger? I must have drifted off eventually because I woke with a start, heart pounding. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The hike, the mountain, the woods. But what had woken me? I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There it was again, a sound like soft footsteps circling our tent. Too deliberate for an animal, too stealthy for a fellow hiker. "Megan," I whispered, reaching out to shake her shoulder. No response. I turned over, groping in the darkness. My hand found her sleeping bag, flat and empty. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The harsh beam confirmed what my hands had discovered. Megan was gone. Her sleeping bag was unzipped, her boots missing from where she'd placed them neatly at the foot of the tent. The footsteps outside stopped. "Megan," I called, my voice embarrassingly small. "Is that you?" Silence answered me. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the thin nylon walls of our tent, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A perfect imitation of Megan's voice. "Jess, can you come out here? I found something amazing." The voice was Megan's. The inflection, the cadence. But something was wrong. It was too perfect, like a recording played at precisely the right volume. And Megan never called me Jess. She always used my full name, Jessica. "Where are you?" I called back, my hand already reaching for the pepper spray in my pack. "Just a few yards from the tent. You have to see this. It's beautiful." My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed danger. I pulled on my boots with trembling hands and zipped open the tent just enough to peek outside. The meadow was bathed in cold moonlight, the trees at its edges casting long shadows across the grass. Our fire had died to embers, casting a faint red glow that did little to penetrate the darkness. And there, at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure that made my heart stutter. It looked like Megan. Her height, her build, her curly hair catching the moonlight. But she stood unnaturally still, her back to me, facing the dark woods. "Megan?" My voice cracked. Slowly, the figure turned. In the dim light, I could make out Megan's features, but they were wrong somehow. Her face seemed slack, her eyes too wide, her smile stretched too far across her face. "Come see Jessica. It's waiting for us both." She extended a hand toward me, beckoning. Her movements were jerky, puppet-like. I clutched the pepper spray tighter, my mind racing. Where was the real Megan? Had she gone to use the bathroom and encountered whatever this was? Was this actually her, but something had happened to her? Or was I still asleep, trapped in a nightmare? The Megan thing took a step toward me, then another, its movements becoming smoother, more natural with each step. Its smile never faltered. "Don't be afraid," it said, but its voice had changed, deeper now, with an undercurrent that sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. "I just want to show you what I showed your friend." I backed up, bumping into the tent. "What did you do to Megan?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. It cocked its head at an impossible angle. "Nothing she didn't want. Nothing you won't want, too, once you understand." That was enough for me. I turned and ran, not back into the vulnerable tent but toward the trail we'd come up. I had no plan beyond putting distance between myself and that thing. I'd find help, come back for Megan if she was still... I couldn't complete the thought. The forest closed around me, branches clawing at my face and arms as I stumbled down the path. My phone's flashlight bounced wildly, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. My lungs burned, unused to the thin mountain air and the exertion of running on an uneven trail. Behind me, I heard nothing. No pursuit, no calling of my name. That was almost worse than if the thing had chased me, because now I had no idea where it was. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for breath. The night pressed in around me, the darkness almost tangible. I switched off my flashlight, partly to conserve battery and partly to avoid making myself a target. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I became aware of shapes moving among the trees, not the wind-stirred branches, but deliberate movement. I held my breath, pressing myself harder against the rough bark of the tree. A twig snapped to my left. Then came Megan's voice again, but this time it sounded genuine, pained, frightened. "Jessica, please help me. I can't see. It did something to my eyes." Every instinct told me it was another trick, but what if it wasn't? What if the real Megan had escaped whatever had taken her and was now injured, needing my help? "Jessica, please." The voice broke into sobs that tore at my heart. I steeled myself and called out, "Megan, if that's really you, tell me something only you would know." The sobbing stopped abruptly. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, remember the night of your 21st birthday? When you kissed Professor Wilson at that bar and swore me to secrecy? My blood ran cold. That had happened exactly as described, a drunken mistake I'd never told another soul about. Only Megan knew. "Where are you?" I called, turning my flashlight back on. "Follow my voice," she replied, sounding weaker now. "Please, hurry." Against my better judgment, I pushed away from the tree and moved in the direction of her voice. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating fallen logs, rocks, twisted roots, but no Megan. "Keep talking," I urged. "It's cold, Jessica. So cold. I can feel it inside me now, learning everything about us." I stopped dead in my tracks. That didn't sound like Megan at all, not even like a human being trying to imitate her. Before I could turn and run again, my flashlight beam fell upon something that drove the breath from my lungs. Megan's hiking boot, lying on its side in the dirt. Beside it, her compass, and a trail of something dark and wet leading deeper into the woods. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to get back to the trail, to find my way down the mountain to safety and help. But I couldn't abandon Megan, not without knowing. So I followed the dark trail, my flashlight revealing it to be what I feared. Blood still wet enough to glisten in the artificial light. The trail led me to a small hollow between two massive boulders, and there, curled on her side with her back to me, was Megan. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, rushing forward. "Megan, I'm here. We need to go." I reached for her shoulder to turn her toward me. She rolled easily, limply. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. It was Megan's face, but hollow somehow, as if something essential had been scooped out of her. Her eyes were open but filmed over, milky white with no pupil or iris. Her mouth hung slack, lips blue. But worst of all was the expression frozen on her features. Not fear or pain, but a kind of ecstatic wonder, like someone who had seen something so beautiful it had destroyed them. I scrambled backward, a scream building in my throat, but unable to escape. As I moved, Megan's body shifted, and I saw the wound, a perfectly circular hole in her chest, edges smooth as if cut with surgical precision. There was surprisingly little blood, and through the hole I could see not ribs or organs but only darkness, deeper than the night around us. The scream finally tore from my throat, echoing through the trees. In response, I heard something else, a sound like wet stones sliding against each other coming from all directions at once, and then they emerged from between the trees. Figures like the one that had worn Megan's appearance, but no longer trying to maintain human form. They moved in ways no human body could, joints bending backward, limbs elongating and contracting with each step. Their faces were approximations of human features, details shifting and flowing like wax under heat. I ran. There was nothing else to do. I ran without direction, without hope, just the animal instinct to put distance between myself and those things. Branches whipped my face, roots caught my feet, but terror kept me upright and moving. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something ahead, a structure of some kind. As I drew closer, I recognized it as a cabin, old and weathered but solid. A human structure meant human help. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. When no one answered, I tried the handle, unlocked. I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me and frantically searching for a lock or bar. There was an old-fashioned bolt, which I slid into place with shaking hands. The cabin was a single room, dusty and apparently long abandoned. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Old furniture draped in sheets stood like ghosts in the gloom. The air smelled stale and faintly of something chemical I couldn't identify. I sank to the floor, back against the door, trying to control my breathing and think. My phone showed no signal. Not surprising, this deep in the mountains. The time read 3:17 a.m. Dawn was hours away. A sound from outside froze me mid-thought. a soft tapping on the door right at the level of my head. Then came a voice, but not Megan's this time. "Let us in, traveler. It's cold outside." The voice was elderly, male, with a heavy Adirondack accent. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Name's Elias Whitcomb. This is my cabin you've taken shelter in. Been in my family for generations." It sounded reasonable, human, but after what I'd seen with Megan, I wasn't taking any chances. "I'm sorry, but I can't open the door right now," I said. "There's something out there. Something dangerous." A pause, then, "Ah, you've seen them, have you? The Echo people. They don't mean no harm, not really. They're just curious about us. Let me in, and I'll explain everything." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something wrong with his voice now, a hollow quality, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. "I think I'll wait until morning," I replied. The friendly pretense dropped immediately. The voice that responded was no longer old or human. It was the same multi-toned sound I'd heard from the Megan thing. "We have waited so long for new vessels. Yours will do nicely." The female was flawed, her mind too easily broken by what we showed her. "But your fear makes you strong. You will last much longer." I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voice continued, seeming to come from inside my own head now. "We were here before your kind. We will be here after. We are the echo of what was and what will be again. And now you will join us." A heavy thud against the door made me jump. Another followed, then another. Something was throwing its weight against the wood. The ancient hinges groaned in protest. It was only a matter of time before they gave way. Frantic, I searched the cabin for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a trap door in the floor, partially hidden under a ragged rug. An escape route? With the pounding on the door growing more intense, I had little choice. I dragged the rug aside and pulled on the iron ring. The trap door opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The door behind me splintered, a long crack appearing in the aged wood. I didn't hesitate. I swung my legs into the opening and began to climb down, pulling the trap door shut above me. The ladder led to a narrow tunnel, its walls supported by old timber beams. My flashlight revealed it stretching ahead into darkness. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth and something else. That same chemical odor I'd noticed in the cabin, stronger now. I had no choice but to follow the tunnel. Above me, I heard the cabin door finally give way, followed by the sound of multiple somethings entering the space. Then came the scrape of the trap door being opened. They were coming. I ran, ducking to avoid the low ceiling, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. The tunnel began to slope downward, taking me deeper into the mountain. Water seeped through the walls, making the ground slippery and treacherous. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a larger space, a natural cave, its walls glistening with moisture. My flashlight couldn't penetrate far enough to see the full extent of it, but directly ahead was something that stopped me cold. A circle of standing stones, each about waist-high, arranged around a central altar-like slab. The stones were covered in carvings, spirals, waves, and symbols I didn't recognize. But it was what lay on the altar that turned my stomach. Bodies, or parts of them. Some fresh, some in advanced stages of decay. All with the same circular wounds I'd seen on Megan. And moving among them, examining them with delicate, too long fingers, was a figure that my mind struggled to comprehend. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs that bent in too many places. Its skin was the color and texture of wet clay, features constantly shifting and reforming. Where its face should have been was only a suggestion of eyes and a mouth, holes that seemed to lead to the same infinite darkness I'd seen inside Megan. It hadn't noticed me yet, focused on its grisly work. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit growing closer in the tunnel. I was trapped between the horrors behind and the monstrosity ahead. In desperation, I cast my flashlight beam around the cave, looking for another exit. There, to my right, what appeared to be another, smaller tunnel. It was my only hope. I would have to pass close to the altar and its attendant horror to reach it. Taking a deep breath, I switched off my flashlight and began to edge along the wall of the cave, moving as quietly as possible. The darkness was almost total, with only the faintest phosphorescent glow from fungus growing on the cave walls providing any light at all. I felt my way forward inch by inch, the rough stone scraping my palms. I was halfway to the tunnel when my foot dislodged a small stone. It clattered across the cave floor, the sound amplified in the silence. The thing at the altar went completely still. Then, with terrible slowness, it turned toward me. I couldn't see it clearly in the gloom, but I felt its attention fix on me like a physical weight. A sound filled the cave. Not quite a growl, not quite a word, but something between the two that made my teeth vibrate in my skull. I abandoned stealth and ran for the tunnel, switching my flashlight back on. Behind me, the thing let out a screech that was echoed by the pursuers now entering the cave from the passage I'd come through. The new tunnel was narrower than the first, forcing me to turn sideways at points to squeeze through. It wound deeper into the mountain, occasionally branching. I chose directions at random, knowing only that I needed to get away, to find a way back to the surface. The tunnel began to slope upward, giving me hope. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exhaustion, but I pushed on. Eventually, I saw something ahead that made my heart leap, a patch of pre-dawn gray. An exit. I emerged onto a steep, rocky slope near the summit of Echo Mountain. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading as night reluctantly gave way to day. But my relief was short-lived. From the tunnel behind me came sounds of pursuit, closer now. And ahead of me, scattered across the mountainside, I could see more of the Echo people, their forms outlined against the lightening sky. They had emerged from other tunnels, other entrances to their underground realm. They began to converge on me from all sides, moving with that same impossible fluidity. In the growing light, I could see them more clearly, their features constantly shifting, never settling on one form for more than a few seconds. Some wore fragments of their victims' appearances, a face here, a limb there, like ill-fitting clothes. I backed away until I felt the edge of a cliff behind me. Far below, through swirling mist, I could make out the trees and rocks of the valley floor. A fatal drop. The Echo people formed a semicircle around me, cutting off any escape. One stepped forward, the largest of them, the one I'd seen at the altar. Up close, its shifting features were even more disturbing. For a moment, it wore the face of an elderly man, perhaps the real Elias Whitcomb, before melting into something else entirely. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of everyone it had ever consumed. "We have existed in this place since before your kind learned to make fire," it said. "We feed on more than flesh. We take everything, memories, experiences, dreams. Your friend showed us your world through her eyes. Now you will join our chorus." It reached for me with impossibly long fingers. I could smell that chemical odor again, stronger now, like ozone and decay mixed together. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I thought of Megan, of her empty eyes and the wonder frozen on her face. I thought of all the missing hikers over the years, of their families never knowing what happened to them. I thought of my comfortable apartment in Manhattan, of the life I'd taken for granted. And I made a decision. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I won't." I pulled the emergency flare from my pocket, the one item from my pack I'd managed to grab in my panicked flight from the tent. With a silent prayer, I struck it against the cliff face. It ignited with a harsh, chemical hiss, burning with an intense red light that seemed to physically pain the Echo people. They recoiled, their forms rippling in distress. I held the flare toward them, buying myself seconds. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I tossed the burning flare directly at the leader. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Where the flare touched its clay-like skin, the creature began to bubble and melt. It let out a shriek that was echoed by all the others, a sound of such agony and rage that I clapped my hands over my ears. The leader thrashed, its form losing cohesion entirely. The others rushed to it, trying to help, momentarily forgetting me. It was the only chance I would get. I edged along the cliff face, finding a narrow path that led downward. Without looking back, I began to descend as quickly as I dared on the treacherous slope. The sky continued to lighten as I made my way down the mountain. Behind and above me, the inhuman screaming gradually faded, whether because the creatures had retreated back into their tunnels or because I'd put enough distance between us, I couldn't tell. By the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks, I had reached the main trail. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the dirt path, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and delayed shock. That's where the search party found me 3 hours later. Rangers and volunteers who'd been alerted when neither Megan nor I had returned to the trailhead as scheduled. I told them about the fall, how Megan had slipped on loose rocks in the dark while answering nature's call, how she'd tumbled down a ravine so steep I couldn't reach her, how I'd gotten lost trying to find help. It was the only story they would believe, the only one that wouldn't get me committed to a psychiatric facility. They never found Megan's body. The ravine where I claimed she'd fallen was searched thoroughly, but yielded nothing. Eventually, she became another statistic, another hiker lost to the unforgiving wilderness of the Adirondacks. I returned to Manhattan, to my job and my apartment, and the comforting noise and light of the city. But I am not the same person who left. I keep all the lights on at night now. I can't bear silence or darkness or the sight of clay. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear Megan's voice asking me to come see something amazing. The official report listed Echo Mountain as dangerous due to unstable ground and unmarked mine shafts. The Northern Trail was closed to hikers. No one goes there anymore. But sometimes hikers on nearby peaks report hearing strange sounds carried on the wind, voices calling out in perfect imitation of loved ones, beckoning them to come and see, to come and join. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake to find my phone lighting up with text messages from Megan's number, a number that should have been disconnected long ago. They're always the same. "It's beautiful here, Jessica. There's room for you too. I've moved 3 times, changed my number twice. It doesn't matter. They found me once. They know me now, and I know the truth about what dwells in the hollow heart of Echo Mountain. They are patient. They have existed for eons. They can wait a little longer for me. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that one day I'll look in the mirror and see my face beginning to shift and change. And on that day, I'll join Megan and all the others in the endless, echoing chorus beneath the mountain.